believe we're already here. Sad scenes to get this to us. I'm Bruce Wilson. You may have seen me before, hosting a couple other times. But right now, we're going to be talking with Greg McComas, who is going to talk about operations on the Michigan Interstate St. Clair subdivision. Greg has been a model rider since his first LBG train at 6. I guess it's variation on Lionel. Texas movable EOTs.
All right. Thanks, Bruce. So good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about operations on the Michigan Interstate. And so we're going to dive right in here. I got some great content of what we do on the Michigan Interstate, some great takeaways, some good discussions and conversations that you can have with your friends, and also just things you can answer yourself. So let's dive right in, and we're going to talk about flex operations. And with that being said, I do have a Facebook page, also a blog. So I did put them on here on the front, on the first page here on the title slide. So if you're interested to see more content, did a Michigan Interstate layout tour. So go back, take a look at that from the recordings on YouTube or Facebook, and you can kind of walk through the Michigan Interstate station by station. So let's jump right in and start talking about operations, what we're going to do today. So today's conversation, we're going to talk about just real high level operations on the Michigan Interstate St. Clair sub. It's an HO scale layout. And then we're going to jump into, and why there's some people get kind of caught on that. There's a lot of great content out there, whether it's publications or on the web. And I think over the years, I've pulled a lot of different things as I've done, what we're doing. So it's continually flexible. And then at the end, we're going to talk about documentation. So having an operating layout, especially if it's ops focused, documentation is really important. You may know your story, and you've been sitting there for hours. That gives your operators a clear understanding of what you're there to do on the layout with the railroad, and also they make sure they have a good time. I mean, it's frustrating to go to a layout, not understand what you're doing, and then your operators walk away frustrated that they didn't get to do anything like they wanted to, or they just didn't understand the concept. And then after all of that, we'll have some questions. Open up for about 10 minutes of questions. So we're going to keep us on time here. Got about 40 minutes or so of discussion, and then we'll have our questions. So the Michigan Interstate St. Clair sub is an HO scale layout, and so it is in a 12 by 13 double deck room. It's actually an office with French doors. It is a proto freelance class 2 regional. So I stay modern day. So it's kept within 5 years of current date. So 2020 back to 2015. So I do a part of keeping cars current. As cars attrit based on age outs, they leave the layout. They're sold. So I do keep the layout very current within plus or minus 5 years. The St. Clair sub in itself is actually a 100-mile subdivision. However, in my my size of my room, I had to selectively compress that layout into about a 30-mile segment. And so that's what we're going to focus on. And we'll come back to the map here in just a minute. Trains are dispatched via a combination of direct traffic control, DTC, whether it's by the dispatcher or the actual block cards. And also the main line between Bay City and Gerhardt also does have automatic ABS, and that's an ABS system from Azatrac. So that's adds another layer of operations to it. Car movement, we use JMRI operations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at a high level. Controlling the railroad is a combination of Digitrax using the Linwe for individuals, if you believe that. So everyone brings their own throttles, and it's with the smaller space, we keep it wireless to avoid any issues. On a session, and even on a layout to my size, we're processing around 130 to 140 cars a session, and that's being done through 12 to 14 trains. And of those trains, you got 6 to 8 of those are merchandise, so your heavy haulers, your drags, if you will. That varies based on if I have them terminate or originate at Bay City, or if I have them come through as block swap trains. I do change up session by session to keep the operators kind of guessing what's next or what the traffic levels are doing. There's also a yard job that is focused on just working and processing at Bay City focal slinger yard. There's also a yard job that works Bay City Industries. There's quite a few industries around Bay City. There's a road switcher that's based at Gray's trains coming to or from Port Huron, Exeter, Hardles that come out of Bay City. They're local turns, sugar beet, and not modeled, but to your west, to your left, out of Bay City, I have what's called the shop turn, which goes to Mount Pleasant and also services Dow Chemical, and that's via staging. So that train runs off on layout during a session with chemical traffic. So, a lot of railroads, a lot of trains in a small space, and not to mention in a session, I may throw in a coal unit train, aggregate train, a grain train, or even a rock or a high wide wind blade train, which is really neat. So, and we to keep the sessions exciting, have fun, and really enjoy model railroad ops. So that layout itself can operate from one individual up to 5. Yeah, if we're really, if we got some skinny folks, I can probably fit in 6, and you'll see why as we get into it. There, also the layout that I won't rehash on. But then, just real quick, looking over to our right, we have the actual system map, right? So we have kind of a key of railroads. And these are just talking about the main trunk lines, main branch lines. So we got, it's kind of like an upside down Y partnership or joint venture with the Wisconsin, Upper Michigan, noted up through Marquette and then heading towards Superior and Sault Ste. Marie. So near like the southwestern part of Michigan, near Niles to Chicago. So kind of creating those connections. 4 of them are modeled, and so I kind of noted that. The other ones are either represented by staging or the actual helix. So it helps us kind of create that elongation of a route run. So let's define operations. I think, in my opinion, and seeing a lot of people's and correspondence on blogs and in chat rooms, I think it's one of the hardest things people have a hard time defining, right? And once you define what operation it is that you want, that helps you start creating an outline. I mean, there's great content, great, people have done some amazing things out there. And I won't get into all of that detail because it's out there, but there's publications and internet content that really helps you and see what others have done and make that and answering that question for yourself. It will help you outline everything else and how it'll fit into your model railroad, especially if it's an operations focused layout. So the questions that I always pose, when people ask me how I got started into it, or what are things I need to focus on, and we're just going to focus on ops. So I'm not going to get into layout planning, layout building, track schematics, or how do you put in track or any of those things. We're gonna stay focused here on the ops questions, and that's really, what is your railroad's purpose? What type of railroad is it? Are you going to model a prototype, a freelance, or a proto freelance? Do you want to have one? Is it modular? Are you building one? Is it already built? And then also another question that I think a lot of people sometimes miss is car and train management. How are you going to manage your fleet of cars? Do you just have 400 cars in your layout and 400? And I think at the end, there's a lot of people that will tell you what you should want, what you should do. But ultimately, as the modeler, you have to ask the question to yourself, what do you want? It is your layout. It is your railroad. I think it's buy cars, equipment, and spend the time into it. Get these basic things down on paper. Actually putting them down as a goal and sticking them in your layout room. Like, hey, this is what I want to be, aligning where you maybe got off track. So let's move on a little more and talk about that. And let's put that into context with the Michigan Interstate. So flex ops. And so this is something I employ on the Michigan Interstate. And it's going to allow you to flex the layout from start to finish. And it's going to allow you to do a lot of different things, allow you to have the ability to change things and adjust the layout based on variables such as operators, time, or all just the situation you're in, control, right? So controlling the layout. So really the F is find your layout's purpose, right? That gets us back to the basic questions we just posed. What is your layout's purpose? What is this? Like the TXOR out in West Texas, they service Buzzy Unisim Cement. I mean, that is their intended design. They are there to service Buzzy Unisim Cement and get those cars and loads to and from the plant to the BNSF interchange at Sweetwater. So, define what is a purpose. Learn and labor. So learn about what you want to do. And then at the same time, get building something, whether it's a small diorama where you can test your scenic abilities, or just, hey, for some photographs. It allows you to keep moving forward, and build something, especially in the pro freelance. You really have to tell that story and create that story. It's not just an engine; it's the whole outline in it. And I get this photo here. It kind of tells the example. This here is a freelance crossing of the Saginaw River, and this is a primary layout design element of the Michigan Interstate. This here defines is one of the main reasons and main scenes that help me define this is in mid-Michigan, and it helps put my freelance railroad into the prototype, and making it believable, right? It's telling that story. Execute and evolve. So we'll talk about car management, we'll talk about train management on what that means. And then at the end, cross-examine your plan, right? So as you're moving along through the plan, you have an idea what you want to do, what you want to go, where you want to go. As you're tracking toward the ultimate result, engage others, and we'll kind of chat about that and the kind of ways you can do that constructively. Right? So it's just a layout. Interstate. What type of railroad? Michigan Interstate is a Class 2 regional in Michigan. It handles bridge traffic. That's up to the Mackinac Straits, interchanging to the Wisconsin Upper Michigan. It's also hauling bridge traffic for the CN across Michigan. We have online customers such as Michigan Sugar, which hauls lots of sugar products. MAC, which is Michigan Agricultural Commodities, a large terminal elevator on the layout that helps export Michigan farmers grains and soybean industries. Also help create and generate the traffic and what defines why does Michigan Interstate exist. Also, Dow Chemical, especially the Midland complex, is extremely large in model. And so I'm able to use staging to my advantage and having those tank cars and plastic resin cars. Additionally, Fort Mackinac is a big paper company on Michigan Interstate, not modeled other than their corrugated mill, their plant on Michigan Interstate, which is a smaller facility, but their overall large chemical cars, your pulp cars, your finished paper. And so this photo here really helps kind of tells in this photo, you can kind of see what is Michigan Interstate doing. You got some CN in there. You got some cement hoppers, Wisconsin Upper Michigan cars. There were some other sand cars in there. You can kind of see a lot of paper cars, chemical traffic, and of course, grain. So this photo here really kind of tries to bring in the essence of, wow, okay, just looking at the yard, you can see based on the traffic makeup, automotive cars, automotive box cars. You don't see them here. There's nothing related to the automotive industry that Michigan Interstate handles. And it's surprising for being in Michigan, but in the area we service, there's not really automotive plants. So you don't see any auto racks here. And so it's cars and traffic that really is designed to fit the need and purpose of the railroad. So our next item here, learn and labor, and really about building something, right? And so, the question is on a proto layout that's based on a prototype. When I say like the BNSF Slayton sub or, UP Marysville sub, you have a lot to use and to learn about because you have something there to actually see. You can go rail fan those. You can pick up old timetables. Like it kind of gives you, in a way, depending on the area you model and when you model, it gives you an opportunity to learn a ton about that specific railroad that you want to model in a prototype aspect. When you get into pro freelance and freelance, for that example, and I know those waters are muddy, and I'm just gonna say they're kind of one and the same, but they're slightly different. You proto freelance, you have your prototype practices and concepts. We can have real or fictitious locations. So, for example, on the Michigan Interstate, on that original mid-Michigan crossing the Saginaw River, which is the scene right there at Bay City, but all of the other downline stations, such as Edsel, West, Grays Lake, Gearhart, Upper Huron. Those are all fictional, but we're trying to take names of towns that are in that part of Michigan and try to capture that essence, right? And so you're kind of blending the two. You're blending the prototype city, but also freelance stations, um, fictional stations, if you will, to kind of help create that story, especially from a freelance perspective. You have to have a little bit more latitude, especially when you're trying to have a freelance railroad that's actually integrated into a modern day actual rail network with Lake State Railway and Huron Eastern, CN, CSX. You have to make sure you find a way to make that plausible. In Central or the Pennsylvania or even the Grand Trunk at one time in the history of Michigan railroads, a lot of the lines that get to those are fictional. Uh, Grand Trunk and Penn Central branch lines and different lines in Michigan that were fictional were spun off into small subsidiaries, and they kind of all coalesced into Michigan Interstate at the end. So, taking that opportunity and kind of build a back. Grew up in Michigan, and so I watched a lot of these railroads go through a lot of hard times, and a lot of railroads get abandoned. And so I think a lot of us can relate to from a childhood or at a certain time in our life. We like to learn about those railroads. We read about them, we see them, and then we want to capture them. And I know that's one of the big drivers behind Michigan Interstate that I've been modeling now for over 25 years. So, I started modeling as a kid in a real simple way. So, um, freelance in general, it's very similar to proto freelance. Like I said, the waters are muddy between the two, and I know it can create quite a division in individuals when you're discussing it. So I want to say the lines are blurred, but being completely freelance offers you a lot more flexibility because you're not modeling a specific town that's actually real. Maybe it's all fictional to a point. When I built the Michigan Interstate to try to bring and actually place it into a rural part of Michigan at the time I model. So that's kind of learning about it, and then really when you're learning about this, soak it up. Those prototypes and pull the practices and the opportunities and the things they do in their fleets, pull them together and help use those concepts to make your freelance railroad. In this case here, Michigan Interstate's paint scheme, if you notice, looks very similar to the Grand Trunk. And instead of being red on the nose or that red orange, it's like a UP yellow, right? So even a freelance railroad is still inspired by a prototype in some shape or form. So, and the last piece is to get building. I know a lot of folks have some amazing stuff, and I always challenge them to put a 1x6 down with some track and just practice some scenery concepts. This most recent model railroader had a fantastic article from Lance about just building a small concept layout. Was a 2x8 or 1x8, just to work harder on it, telling that story, and moving you forward. Before you know it, now that 1x8 turns into a 12x8. Now you have a whole layout, and you have either a branch line or part of a subdivision modeled. So get started to make it work. We see that in the Star Wars saga, right? So that's okay. It's a hobby. It's a freelance railroad. Make the most of it and do what you like to do. Okay, so we're getting to the execute and evolve. And so I'm going to break this down into two parts here. And first, we're going to talk about car management, and then we'll talk about train management. And these are all using examples of what we do on the Michigan Interstate. So, will your rail cars have purpose, or will you just run them around just because I can run train cars around? Well, nothing wrong with that. But as I was building the layout, kind of defining that concept, I knew what I wanted. But hey, you're still getting your industries fleshed out, and maybe your yard's not fully completed yet. I was doing manual movement to industries, so I was doing handwritten switch lists and train lists. And here's examples to the right, where I print these out, and I would just have an operator fill them out, or I would fill them out. I did it for industry pulls, industry spots, especially if the industry was kind of still being Genesis and it wasn't what I want it to be yet. Then it stopped me from having an operation session. start doing it with manual movement to industries, handwritten train and switch lists. And I call that kind of phase one of car management. Phase two, you're moving toward an operational layout, right? So maybe you got all your track in, your switches are in, your industry track are in. You're still building out your layout. You're still putting in, scenery and industries, but you have a solid defined track plan. And I said at that point, you really want to move toward a structured car movement. That's what we done in the Michigan Interstate. And so there's a lot of different ways you can move cars. I know folks who use like little colored car tabs that sit on top of their cars, an end skill. And that's a great way to do it. You got your 4-cycle waybills, another great concept. And there's plenty of good resources to really get you started on that way and using 4-cycle waybills, whether it's temporary or full time. And then one thing I use on the Michigan Interstate that was a little bit different is being a modern day. I wanted to focus on blockings, right? So, trains in Bay Yard, I built 8 blocks. Every train car that moves through a prototype railroad has a block to where it's going to, whether it's a local block, a through block, interchange. And so I actually use block cards and I use baseball card protectors and for that car. And I would actually see down here this example of a block card for Upper Huron. That card was this little cardstock piece was slipped into the baseball card holder for, let's say, a covered hopper, and it's like, okay, it's going to Michigan Sugar Track 1012, right? And so the operators and the yardmasters would use this to switch the cars and put them into the block, a color-coded block that was similar going to Upper Huron for Michigan Sugar, which was service. I'm not going to take anything away from that. He can yardmaster with the best of them. I mean, he knows it. He knows it better than anyone else, in my opinion. And I really encourage you guys to check out that presentation this afternoon, because Dan will teach you some great things about how to make a yard really fluid and make it really sing. But getting back to this, I mean, those are the kind of block cards that I use. So you can say it was kind of on the railroad has its own industry card at the actual industry. So like here's an example of crop production services at Grays Lake. It received covered hoppers, inbound fertilizer, and there's instructions for the crew. You're going to spot a load on the pit, and then one car can be stored beyond the pit, right? So it's a 2-car spot, one actual on, one off spot. And so when an individual would come to service, work in the local and service this company at it, phase 1 and phase 2, and then we move on to phase 3. And so as we've kind of, I'll go back here. So as we've moved forward, things like the industry card, and even the blocking, we're going to continue with those into phase 3 and even phase 4. And that's where about a year and a half ago, I made the jump to JMRI ops. I wanted actual, versus trying to do block cards and swapping out cards between sessions, I want something that would do a little bit more work for me. And so with his being a Fall River division, I got to ask him a lot of questions. And I remember he told me, read the instructions from JMRI ops once, twice, and 3 times. And then just for the 4th time, do it again, because you pick up something new. And so there is a learning curve. And there's also a curve to getting things set up. But once you do that, in my opinion, it does some amazing things. And there's some OPSIG articles out there. Getting back to this, phase 3 transition to phase 3 allowed for printed train and printed switch lists. And so I got an example here of the Dow. This is the local Mount Pleasant Bay City, the Dow turn, and basically how the work orders and the train list, what the crew would have, right, when they print out. And then down below is a screenshot from the actual car screen, JMR Ops, just kind of showing the car management, where are cars, what are they doing, what status are they in, right? Kind of brings it all to your fingertips. And then phase 4, I guess before I get to phase 4, is as I was transitioning to JMRI ops, I mean, there is a lot of learning curves and making sure cars go where they need to go properly and track capacity. So as I was going through that and trying out something new for operations, I made sure that my block cards were still on warm standby. And so if something really failed out on JMRI ops, and I was like, I can't get this figured out, I had not completely abandoned what I was already doing. And so I could go back to the block cards with minimal disruption, and the operations program fine-tuned, cars are moving as intended, and you have really minimal modifications other than maintenance, adding cars, removing cars, change trains up and train how they block. Sometimes you have to kind of go back to phase 3 a little bit just because, we're JMRI ops program. So train management, make sure how we're doing on time here. So train really, the St. Clair sub right now is set to run all the phases of train management. And so one operator, me, myself, I can operate the entire train plan sequentially. And so to the right, you see a screenshot of the train plan in JMRI operations. And so I can run them one at a time with no authority. I can run the full train schedule. It'll probably take me about a month to complete. That's all the cars. So about a month to complete, but you can also do it sequential on your own. To the other fascia, I have Velcro. It's kind of like there's signs indicating the DTC blocks on the layout, and you communicate with others on where you are. And it's abbreviated train schedule, so we probably annul 3 to 4 trains and don't run those just to keep focus on a slower session with fewer operators. And we use the DTC card. So once you pull that block off the fascia, right, it's in your hand, you have that authority. And so no one else can enter that block unless they have the card. So it's kind of like a mother may I in a way. And that works well for just a few operators on a real casual session that we can have and still run the trains. Dispatcher in the Michigan Interstate. And so the dispatcher can lay out and authorize and say, okay, you're going to have this block and this block. And he actually controls the railroad. So dispatcher sits right outside the layout room. So it's all verbal. DTC is still in effect along with ABS, issuing, Edsel block and the West block, right? So it's allowing them to go up to Helix. And so that's kind of how that works. So, or a bad order car, we do kind of throw in some situations to really kind of jazz it up and keep operators on their toes. The next evolution of this, and there are a lot of guys out there doing it, but I know one of the things that we're going to be doing here in the next future is having the same amount of operators, 4 to 5, but also having a remote dispatcher. So I have a buddy who just moved to Atlanta from the here in Fort Worth area. We're going to figure out some way to use two-way push-to-talk on a phone and have him actually run the railroad remotely. And that will kind of slow things down a little, which is very similar to how the UP, really all the railroads, right? They're all in dispatching centers, whether regional or centralized, and kind of adding that level of control and management to the trains. And we'll still run a full train schedule when we do that. So after doing, the focus, the find, and the learn, and the evolve and execute, now I really say is cross-examine your plan. And that's check the progress and adjust your plan as accordingly. Involve others to review your work. Solicit constructive feedback, right? This is a hobby. There's no need to be tearing anyone down with unconstructive feedback that's ill-willed. But get their feedback. I got Chris working a layout, a load on top or a train on top, and everyone else is just kind of in the layout room. So as you can see, we put a lot of people in there, and I get a lot of great feedback from people who either are real railroaders, and so they have a good perspective, or folks who have just done a lot of mile railroading over the years, and they have their own thought on it. It's good to hear. And so when you have that first op session, you make that first dive into it, ask your operators afterwards, what worked well, what failed, and then set a goal for another session. Deadlines drive progress. Nothing more to get your progress done is, I have a session come up in 2 weeks. I need to have something done for the layout. Those kind of deadlines will help you drive healthy progress moving forward. And then I think 2 really important pieces on cross-examine is continually improve your railroad. If you're not moving, continually make it better in your eyes, and also your eyes of your operators, in their opinions. But it's up to you. Continue to make it better because of this hobby. And so have fun and enjoy the company of others. So as we're kind of just about providing examples of the Michigan Interstate. So it's really simple to create. And so right here is an example of, I have a timetable, right, showing the entire St. Clair sub. Obviously not all of its model. We're just modeled between essentially Squaw Conning and Gerhard on the layout, but the whole thing is there, right? So it's telling the entire story of that entire subdivision, which helps people understand where they are in the railroad. Additionally, symbol information, telling folks and providing to them, what do your symbols mean, right? And what do these mean? And then you have all those abbreviations, but then you apply that to the actual symbol detail, like, base of the yard job 04, which is the local that services the industries on the 4th day of the month. I mean, so helping people understand that from the railroad level is important. So you have railroad documentation, you have, customer documentation, industry documentation, and car documentation. I think all those are really important to telling your story, freelance or, really from an operations perspective, whether prototype or freelance. It's a documentation, and having information for your operators is extremely important. So industry documentation, these here have been fantastic for the operators. Every station on the railroad, whether it's modeled or not, has its own diagram. And so, every track is labeled, right? So even on a prototype railroad, every track has a name or a track number to it. I mean, it could be the hellhole track for that matter, but it has a name and a number. So our layout should as well. Make sure every track has a name and number. So here's an example of the east end of Bay City. You got the East Yard track coming off the main, the yard. You got Main 1, Main 2. Shame on me, it didn't come over, but that's the Essexville branch to the above the Main 2. But then really the focus here is Fort Mackinac paper, right? That's an industry that serves track 153. So on the industry documentation for the local or this yard switcher, it has cars going to track 153 at Bay City. That's going to Fort Mackinac. And then when an operator goes to work the facility, he has his industry card, right? So we carry over both those things, and they correlate. Okay, here's the industry, here's the actual customer on the track chart, and here is the actual customer information, so the operator knows what he needs to do at the industry. So this is a corrugate plant, spots 3 boxcars inside. Got to pull the empties first, of course, but you cannot bring locomotives inside the facility. So if you have to use a handle or other cars, it could be required. So train documentation, kind of the last piece of the documentation piece, is what I also have for the operators. So, it comes down, especially on this railroad, DCC. So we have consists, and I usually use advanced consisting for a lot of my engines, or actually all my engines. So they're all put in the consists to keep everything consistent. And so I actually use this example. I'll give credit to John Parker. He uses something very similar for his Fall River division, and I borrowed it, right? And so here it is. Road consist 70 is these. They're the functions DTC block, so they know where they are in reference to east and west staging. So a real quick guide they have, and that's on the train information card. And I got the fantastic layout. I was building a new one, and I used this. I just took it and repurposed it for the Michigan Interstate. Real same concept. It's assigned in the session. So documentation. It's amazing how even a small layout, a lot of documentation takes place to make sure that you're able to tell individuals a full story of the railroad they're involved in, and also what they're tasked in doing. So, but great documentation leads to some great sessions. So lastly, resources. I won't dig into this super deep, but network with other modelers, ask questions, operate on their other layouts, try to get invites, operate on other layouts, borrow their ideas. But if you do borrow their ideas, make sure you give them credit. Like I gave credit to John and Chip and Steve, because it wasn't my idea. They had a fantastic idea, and I just repurposed it for the Michigan Interstate. So give them credit. And then also share ideas. A great example of that is this presentation. Get an opportunity in lots of publications, print and web. They're out there, and of course, observe, watch the prototype, see what they do, and then try to mimic it. So that kind of wraps us up here, about 43-ish minutes. So that gives us some time for some questions.
First,
so
it says it is. What is your process for correcting it? Do you add it to the next job physically, remove the car, place where that JMR state should be? How do you handle that?
That's a great question. Mark it back up to where it needs to go, but I'm actually going to leave it on the layout, and then when that next job comes and pulls, they will take it back to the the next connection point, wherever it is. They will go back, then be resequenced to the proper industry, just as if a prototype misswitch car.
So you're modeling the prototype. There you go.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many cars are misswitched on the prototypes. And
yeah. Well, thanks very much, Greg. I just have one quick question. How many iterations of planning did you go through to come up with your schedule?
I showed I can take out like the unit trains and
a lot. And right now we're going to take a short break and get set up for the next clinic. Our man down under has got something on his mind, so let's send it down to Martin.
We've got audience participation time first, Bruce. So we'll go to the. So it's audience participation time, which is the wheel of chat, which has been going quite well this evening. So we'll give the wheel a spin, and basically it'll come up with a subject matter, and all the people in the chat then can respond to it while we get the next guest ready for the presentation. So let me hit the button. The wheel should start spinning. Favorite, and
that should be quite entertaining.
It should be, especially if certain people are up and having a look. So yeah, we'll go with that. So now I've been up in this chair since 10 o'clock last night, and it's now 4 o'clock Sunday morning. So I think it's time for me to say good night. I'm going to go and try and get a couple of hours sleep, and hopefully I should be back when Arthur Hayes, who's a local guy from just up the road from me, is on. So I'll bid everyone to take over.
Yes, I am.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our second clinic in the afternoon. We have Rich Sieben, who was going to talk about modeling operations with a spreadsheet. Chicago Terminal District with 3 railroads presented directly and interchange with 29 others. So that sounds to me like a lot of action going on. Operation, continuous operation, no staging needed. He's going to share a spreadsheet used to make 20 destination cards for 700 cards without going crazy. So welcome, Rich. Just give me a minute here to get set up, and I will.
Uh-oh, what happened? There we go. Is that my cue to start? Okay. Well, this really came about a bit at a time, setting up these car cards. I don't have room for staging, and I always thought having a staging yard was a waste of a perfectly good yard that needed to be switched. Just another excuse to have another operator. So I have 3 main yards that trains go to, and then they exchange to other railroads. Your operators really only need to know where to send a car easily, and they can concentrate on their switching instead of worrying about the geography on and beyond your layout. I use colors to designate switching districts as well as zone track spot arrangement, so operators know exactly where to put a car, and I have labels on the layout where everything's supposed to be. Instead of traditional staging, the endpoint yards are worked and they represent other railroads, other connections. The track, and then what those operators do, the track that has the most cars in it is the next track that they sort out for their outbound switching moves or switching trains. So my answer to this was, next slide, the 20 destination car cards. This way I don't have to restage every time. What we do is if we have enough operators, like say 10 or so people, we can use a real-time clock and we just put in the hour that a car was spotted. And the rule is if the car is spotted, you can't move it again for 2 hours. So for at least hour or turn 2. When I have a smaller number of operators, which with this COVID thing, it's no more than 6 people, then we kind of do it as a turn-based. When everybody's caught up on a turn, then we go to the next turn. Cards are nice and colorful, but there is a purpose to it. Next slide, please. Can we get the next slide? You want to use to designate switching jobs and areas, and then make a numbering scheme for all the sidings and spots. So here's the next slide is a plan of my layout with the colors on it. So everybody knows where yellow is. It's either going to an interchange track at Elsden Yard or the Elsden Industrial District. So everybody has a job in a particular colored area. And as far as the actual switching of the industrial districts, I've got a little map of that area, each area over there by those areas with the names of the sidings, but there's also numbers on the surface of the layout for each. Next slide, please. So the first thing you gotta do is to set up the spreadsheet is you have to start with your siding names and the colors, designate the colors. Then you got to give them numbers. So you see, for instance, yellow starts with 00 for the zone, and then following that is the track. So that's how I do that. That just establishes everything that you're going to be later getting automatically to the car cards. because I needed something that I could do quickly to when I want to make a change to the layout. I have to do 700 car cards. Next slide, please. So to take those numbers, that zone and track, you have to concatenate the numbers, and I used column E for that. So see it, there's the formula up there in the formula bar. So I concatenate those two cells, A and B, and put them together. So that's the track and spot. 0, 0. You know, if something's 0, 0, you know it's going to Elsden. So this way, if somebody was colorblind, they could still operate the layout without too much trouble. Because some of the colors are fairly close. I tried to keep them as far apart from each other visually as I could, but you're not always 100% successful. I'll show you examples later. So then you have to go through, you've done that. This is how I set up the sheet then. You have to have an item number for everything. This is how you select your spots. I use a random number generator, and I'll show you that, how we select the individual sightings and track numbers, bring them up to the top, and then give them fresh item numbers so that you only have things, a boxcar only going to sightings that would take a boxcar, or the gas tank would only go to places that would get a gas tanker. And also you got the colors in there too. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. Any or auto box for this example. Where are they going? And you see I have one, number 1 there is blank. That's another little trick that I came up with later, where I had a couple tracks places that I would like the car to go to, one of 2, and I do a selection. I'll show you that too. But so there's 9 spots for an auto box to go to. So those are all the types of sightings that these box cars could all go to. So you see the numbers there are all higher numbers. And I'll show you why I do that, because I have a separate random number generator to select these guys. So this is a case where cars are going to one of the endpoint yards, basically to be interchanged with other railroads. And these are all the other railroads. Ashland Yard, my big yard, is the only one that has numbered tracks as far as on the car card. Everybody else just uses the railroad shorthand. Next slide, please. So I told you about that special handling, that one that had nothing in it. There it is there. It's gonna select one of the bottom 2. It's either going to be the Illinois Northern Car Shop or the Belt Railway of Chicago Car Shop, the 2 bottom ones in that group. The green ones, I've got 3 sightings that are really on one track. And when I initially set it up, even though it's random, I had too many cars going to those sightings. So this was what I did. It selects one of them and sends a car there, rather than selecting 3 cars and sending 3 cars to the same track. And then you have a lot of off spots. That got to be a little bit of a pain for operating that area. Next slide, please. So here's the guts of it. You got to have the random number generator. So you see that first section, next spot over, you see random yard. That selects one of the yards. And it's just at random. And then I have alternating siding and yard. So this time it picks the siding. So it's going to pick up the 6. The next time it's going to pick up the 168 on the next line down, if the 168 was the random number. Let's see, 02 is, yeah, that's a 6. That's siding yard. Okay, I'm just thinking out loud here. Then I copy that over to from P3, this on row Q, it's selecting, this is where it selects the alternate. So it's 148 in this case. Then we have one more little rule that we got to throw at the end. It's an unlabeled column R. And that's, I got an if statement in there, a couple if statements. So if Q2 is 85, then I pick a random number between 172 and 175. That is, that green area that I showed is going to pick one of those spots, be the random between the Belt Railway 176, 177. That's the Belt Railway of Chicago car shop, or the Illinois Northern car shop. Okay, next slide. So 2 ways to do this. You can write a short macro to do this, which I did. And so I type Control Q. What it does is it grabs everything on column R and plants it over in column I. It's like doing manually Alt ESV heading. It looks at that number and says, if I see that number, I put, this is what I put in the cell. Okay, next slide, please. There we go. An entire card print area, you need to establish conditional formatting for each siding and include the color, the background color, and the font color. So sometimes you need to have some colors that are different than standard black because there's not enough contrast. I've used white or yellow sometimes. And you got to make one of these rules for every siding name. You got to make one of these rules for each track number. It actually simplifies this so much. I used to have a macro and 28 levels of formatting. So you can play with the colors and the fonts. Okay, you got new car card routing. Okay, go to the next slide, please. There's what I just, yeah, I somehow skipped. Sorry. Okay, next slide. Here's some examples of conditional format rules for the sidings. So you see the cell value. If it says BRC engine house or engine tracks, it's going to be this kind of pink, light pink color, and it applies to, and that's the range of cells. Next slide. So, and then you format the cells that contain, and this is the case in numbers, you say, you put it in quotes, the number. So this is the zone and track, 1001 in this case. Between 1001 and 1026, it's going to use that brown color. You can all have a copy of this spreadsheet too. If you just email me, I'll give you that, my email address. Okay, next slide, please. So in your siding names print area, column K, you copy that formula into each cell. The VLOOKUP, and what that's going to do, the VLOOKUP says go to I2, that's the number, and then look it up in this range, A1 through C179, the item number that you got there. So it'll put this VLOOKUP, this is to get the name of the siding. 2 means second column. And then for the numbers, you would have 3, so it would do that as well. Otherwise, the VLOOKUP is the same. Next slide, please. So each track and spot number, you have to have column I and the look and color it appropriately. Next slide, please. So printing the results, well, you select lines for one card, 20 lines. You do a Control C. Next slide, please. And I have this fits on a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. And just paste special formats. The formats brings the colors over. The values just puts in the lettering, but it would all be the wrong colors, be whatever it was last time. And I make a print tab in Excel. Unfortunately, there's no way. I tried to write a macro for it and I found out there's a reason why I can't. A macro to automatically take this over to the print page. So I have to do it data in and then paste again to the same area, Alt EST, and it brings you the formats and the colors. Next page. Optional items that I found were good ideas. If you, in your print page tab, type the card type into the large box on top of the car card. And then that way you can have a bunch of cars, like say for box car. They'll all say box on them, because then you take these and cut the cards and individually off of your 8.5 by 11 sheets. And you know what they are. And then you just got to find, I use a picture of the card and put that picture there. I got the numbers. If we go back to the picture of the car card, I've got the car number on there. Since I do N scale, some people feel they can't read the numbers. Most of them you can. They're not really any different in HO. You have trouble with flat cars just like you do in HO. But I got the number up there, so if you want to match that, more power to you. But as far as I'm concerned, if the car looks like that, that's it. Because chances are the car wouldn't be there unless you had a card nearby. So I don't end up with too many cars and cards in the orphanage, and they match up pretty quickly when they do go there. So it makes it easy. You know, you have the picture of the car, you know what it looks like. Really easy to put them in order. The selection is done at random, so I've not, other than that one exceptional place where I had 4 separate sightings, really 4 locations on one sighting, I never really had a problem with too many cars showing up somewhere, even though there's some figuring out what they're doing, getting the lay of the land. And after about an hour, people start talking again. And we always have a lot of fun. The nice thing about this is I can operate by myself. I can operate with 2 people. I can operate with 13 people. It doesn't matter. And there's no preparation. Anytime somebody wants to come over, we just pick up where we left off and continue on. So if you have any questions, oh, my email address, if you want a copy of the spreadsheet to play with on your own, it's SIER1, the number 1, at msn.com. And I'll be happy to send you a copy of the spreadsheet. I don't have the pictures of the cars on the spreadsheet because one of my earlier versions of the spreadsheet had the pictures on the spreadsheet and it just got too big. You couldn't send it to anybody. So that's why the pictures are done as a separate thing in Word. Bruce, I can't hear you.
I'm on double mute. That's why.
Is that like double secret probation?
It is something like that, because sometimes I forget to mute and I've got 2 mute buttons. Is there such a thing as scale time?
We use real time because
Okay.
you can't switch faster than real time. That's always a problem on a layout that has that I see.
Did it take you to kind of polish everything to the degree you have it now? And if you're going to do anything different, what would you do?
I guess if I were to do something different, I would try to figure out a way to have the printable area. I have a tab for each car type. So there's a tab for box cars, there's a tab for reefers, there's a tab for flat cars. I would figure out how to do the print area on the individual tabs, and I wouldn't have to cut and paste. I started this with, I could do it by eye, like I know about how many cars are going to this siding, about how many are going to that siding. kind of like you do with regular staging. You know, people are like, well, I know I need 5 cars at this industry, so they set up 5 cars to appear there from staging. I suppose I really don't ever have to, but I have every time I just take into account. I've never completely filled up one of those cards. You know, in 2 years, we got halfway through most of the cards. And that's as far as we got. This was a takeoff on the system that a lot of the guys in Rockford use. They would maybe I saw one where they put the date in that they switched the car out. But I added the colors and the zone spot.
How many cars do you have on your layout?
700.
That's a fair number.
Yeah.
And then obviously it would be easy enough to add information for any new rolling stock you acquire, just to punch them in.
Paste a picture of it on the card. We're ready to go.
Ready to go. Do you do anything for assigning motive power to the trains, or is there a plan for
No.
that as well?
No, I mean, everything's yard limits on my layout, so that, you know, there's no need for a dispatcher. You talk with the nearest guy by you. I need to get by. The intensity is on the switching.
Okay, so
So,
motive
like, you got
power
an
is,
engine that works, you take it.
so motive power is first come, first serve type thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I usually have stuff spotted around on the layout, and if somebody doesn't like that engine or whatever, they can use something else.
Right. Another question. How long did it take you to design and incorporate the system and to get it to work smoothly?
It happened over a period of months. I kept doing tweaks to it, so I can't tell you like end to end how long did it take. Its infancy to before I got it to where I wanted it. And now the only tweaks are if I add something or change something, I have to make a change to card cards. E, R.
To go down the spread roll list, so if you could touch that again, that'd be great.
Okay. A lot of the commercial cards, you know, they got a lot of eye candy for model railroaders. Like, you might have a load, or, you know, like what's the bill of lading? Where's it going? A town name. But that gets confusing because they have a color, they know where it's going. Because all the crew needs to know is where to send the car, where to spot it. And that's all the information I want to give them. They really don't care, especially on a model railroad. Get right down to it. They don't care if it's a load of horse feathers or a load of lead. It's all going to where it's where it's going is what's the important point.
Okay, I happen to have what we're looking at and explain in detail actually on your spreadsheet. So you just give me a minute. So hopefully you see the spreadsheet up there now. This one is apparently your siding list. So this is what you've used. And how many total spots do you have? Do you know?
What's the highest number?
117, I see.
Yeah, it's actually a few more than that now. But I think the next tab might. That's right. So that's about what I got. You know, it's a lot of them are yard side. Over 110 industry spots on the layout. So there's lots to do.
Okay, and what so column B is industries. What is the purpose of column F, which looks like it's doing something else?
It's hard for me to see on my phone what column F is.
It lists the industry.
Oh, no, those are the numbers that get selected
Oh, okay.
to make colors. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I on the right and dumps it in there like a card generator. What's the next tab over?
Car types to siding.
Yeah, that's where I designated where what sidings get what car.
Okay,
So
so
you
you've
can scroll
gone
down.
through and give some thought to what you want going where, and then work that into these columns so the program knows what to do.
Right.
Can you mentioned that you have on any car type? And obviously some of these have the team tracks have four type, and that's what would be, if you have an any, would it be picking from any of those four columns then,
Right.
or any of the columns from more than one? Team
Yeah.
track would pick a box. What industry is what gets transferred over, and we got something similar then with the other types of cars you have on your layout.
You know, the cars go to different groups of sidings. You got to bring those all up, copy those all up to the top, and give them your index number, your item number. So then you have to change your formula for random for that page only, random between however many sidings you have for that particular car type.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, so you've got click whirs and buzz and puts it in the proper spot for your car card.
Right.
And then
the four cards on the left, that's one page.
okay.
The four cards on the right, that was just something, a color code I made up just so somebody's got cars for Ashland. They need to know all the colors that are going to Ashland.
Okay. So it's kind of like a
order. It's all going to Ashland. They're going to sort it there. That's why I typically have 2.5 positions for Ashland if it's a full session. So one guy's sorting first into does it go to another railroad or is
so with each
yep. So the lights, the Loomis Yard Industries, and white and gray actually go together. Gray is local to the Roby Street Yard, and white is everything that's going to go on the car float to my little float yard, which I didn't actually ask me to make. She says, why don't you make something portable that you can take with when we go camping, which I'm doing right now.
Interesting. All right, let's just check. I don't think there's any other questions out there. Are there, Brad?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see.
You can go to operatingsessions.com and you can see pictures of my layout.
Okay, operatingsessions.com.
Yeah, I don't have a Facebook page or anything yet. I suppose I should do that. It's getting to the point where I should do that. I'm starting to put down some scenery. I'll post some new pictures to operatingsessions.com soon. I've got about a third of the layout scenic right now.
Okay, somebody's asked, do you ever get a situation where your random number or random generator tries to deliver more cards than spots available for them?
It happens on occasion. So each guy that comes in there knows that that's a car that has to be spotted yet because there wasn't room for it. In fact, I just made off-spot pockets. So if it's off-spot, put it in the off-spot pocket.
Okay. Question, how many yards do you have?
Well, pre-COVID, we were flying then. There was a lot of activity that day. That was
fun. How long would your typical operating session last?
Some people check out at 9, and then people start trailing off about 9 o'clock, get tired of standing.
So somewhere between 3 and 4 hours then, when you're wrapping on. Okay.
Yeah. It's not like there's stage trains and we're out of stage trains to run. Every move you make stages for the next turn.
Okay. Yeah. So it's continually turning over.
Right.
All right. There any more there, Brad?
No, I think that's about it. It's always the way with these clinics that have got so much information in them that
everybody's afraid to ask.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyhow, if people want a copy of your Excel sheet, they can email you.
Yes.
And you can send them a copy. And if not, okay, we thank you very much for presenting this. It's certainly one of the many ways you can use to generate traffic on your layout. And it seems that you have developed something that works well in your situation. So we thank you for that. And we'll get ready in a bit for our next clinic coming up. And in the meantime, Brad, what the condiments?
What was said?
They put a lot of interest.
Kent's got coleslaw, so that's a a good one. So yeah, it looks like there's a good range of condiments that everyone likes on their hot dogs. So it'll be interesting to see what the next question on this wheel of chat is, and
The wheel of chat.
we'll try to keep track of those answers. So.
The anticipation is killing us, like Heinz ketchup.
I've got a bit of lag here, unfortunately, Bruce. The wheel is spinning.
The wheel is
and
spinning.
Throw a bit of temperature in there, and we'll look over them in the break, and we'll come back with the next clinic.
Yes. Okay. Okay, good afternoon again, everybody. Bruce Wilson here hosting for the afternoon, the last afternoon of Gateway Up. Our presenter, Joe, has been an avid model rower since getting his first train set at age of 8. Written about this hobby since the 1990s and started his own model railroad publishing business in 2004. Since 2009, he has been the publisher of Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine and often shares his extensive hobby expertise through the magazine's articles as well as in books and videos. He also models the SP Siskiyou line and HO, and Leo continues. And I will set up the share screen and listen for your cue to advance slide.
Okay, sounds good. So we have the slide deck available, do we? Okay, that looks good. Great. So let's talk about making it run like a dream. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's the basic agenda. And what I wanted, first, this is basically the introduction, but then let's talk about what this run like a dream thing is. We'll get to the foundation, refine it, and so on. Then there's 3 basic areas. I call it like the trifecta of the hobby, right? There's track work, rolling stock, and locomotives, and what it takes to get flawless operation on your layout. And we'll put it all together at the end and kind of wrap up. So next slide. A little bit about me. I entered the hobby in 1967, started my Siskiyou line layout in 1991, and had been having op sessions since 1998. However, if you're following my editorials and conversations in Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine, you know that a couple years ago I started dismantling Siskiyou Line 1. Long story short, we are planning. My wife and I had a conversation, talked about what we'd like to do when we retire. I will still do the magazine in retirement, but and MRH stuff in retirement. But we said really what we'd like to do is relocate to a rural location, have an outbuilding, nice shop, all this sort of stuff. So I said, well, what's in the basement's dumpster fodder. So we've been talking about this thing called TOMA, the one module approach. So I said, why don't I dismantle Siskiyou Line 1? I can refinish the basement so we could sell the house. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen, be probably 5 years out. But anyway, enough about that. So I'm modeling the 1980s SP and HO and Siskiyou Line 2 using the modular sectional approach. Also, we'll model that. Southern Oregon setting, 40 plus locos, 300 plus cars. I use NCE, DCC, and 16 operators are optimum on my layout. So next slide. So little shameless plug here. This is a book series, started as a book series, 3 books, track work, rolling stock, locomotives. The first 2 books are done, and you can either buy them from the Model Railroad Hobbyist store, or you can also find them on Amazon. I will say that if you want to get them on the store, and if you're watching this slideshow today, which will be out hopefully next year, use the coupon code, all uppercase, SAVE BIG, SAVEBIG, all uppercase, and you'll save 20% on the MRH store. Okay, enough about that. On to the next slide. So let's look at the dream. So it's all about proper priorities, really. And for me, I'm really into operations, realistic operations. That's why I do the hobby. And your eyes closed to see how much fun that is. And you'll quickly see that there's definitely a big visual component to operation. And I also have talked about in some of my editorials and different conversations on the MRH forum, a thing called quality of run versus quantity of run. And it's interesting because when you first start out in the hobby, you think quantity of run is the key to best hobby satisfaction. The bigger, the better, right? But after you've been in the hobby for a while, you start to realize that quality of run actually leads to the most hobby satisfaction. So that's what this is all about. It's how do we get the best quality of run? And it comes down to predictable performance. If we can prevent it from ever happening in the first place, that's what we want to do. And so that leads to what I call, so we'll talk more about Chester here in a minute. But let's define quality of run versus quantity of run. Let's drill down into that and look at that a little more. Quality of run, and these are in order by priority. Quality of run, derailments are rare. That's number one. And don't succumb to what I call ops amnesia. It's very easy, and one way you can really see if you are succumbing to ops amnesia is decide that for the next month or whatever, however long, however often you operate, you're going to record every single failure. Nothing gets past you, okay? And you will find that you're getting a lot more failures than you might think. And that's because of what I call ops amnesia. You'll run a train, something will go on the ground, you put the wheels back on, and 5 minutes later, of every failure, you'll find there's a lot of them. Another thing is locos look real and they run well. We'll talk more about that a little later on. Now, quantity of run, the scope is often much larger, and you pick any two of the three, right? Cheap, fast, or good. It can be cheap and fast, or it can be cheap and good, but it's not going to be very fast. It'll take you a long time. Or it can be good and fast, but it won't be cheap, and so on. So you generally can't do all three. And as I like to say, it ain't no fun if the trains don't run. Next slide. So getting predictable performance, the key is consistency. And he's a statistician that helped the Japanese get back on their feet after World War II. And he has a lot of interesting principles on how to get a process, basically anything you do, how to get to good quality. And I pulled a couple of things from his sort of, and so that's things like couplers, wheels, use one wheel set vendor, one coupler vendor. As much as you can, go to a single source you can trust, because picking multiple different sources or multiple different versions of product, you end up introducing extra variation, and that extra variation creates inconsistencies, and the inconsistencies then erode predictable performance. So that's the idea. And then build in quality, which means you use a predictable process. Don't do, we'll fix it later. You want to prevent issues from ever happening. So that means consistent components for track. You pick one track work vendor to the degree that you can, one loco vendor to the degree you can, one rolling stock. And we're talking about not the product, overall product, but we're talking about the areas regarding the track wheel coupler interface. Okay, so locos, same couplers, same wheels to the degree that you can. Rolling stock, same couplers, same wheels, degree you can, and track work, same vendor for the track work. And you'd be surprised at how different the track rail, the base of the rail, the head of the rails, different widths, even though it's the same height. So, and all of that introduces variation. So next slide. So let's talk about Chester. He was rather risk averse, and you notice his character wears a belt and suspenders. So I call it the belt and suspenders method. And so basically you assume Murphy was right. If it's going to break or fall apart or have a problem, it will. And so redundancy is one of the secrets to combating Murphy here, right? So an example is you put wipers on your wheels and you put a stay alive in the locomotive principle. So an example is what I call a coupler trip pin hack to show this self-correcting concept. So next slide. So on the left is the unaltered trip pin. And on the right is a trip pin with a slight bend up. And remember, the idea here is to prevent things from ever happening, right? So if you just curve that trip pin up slightly, we're now using the Chester principle here, and we assume that that trip pin is going to catch on things like grade crossings, if the coupler happens to be low at all, any cross at grade. So this is an application of the Chester principle, and that's the idea all through this, is we're going to. So let's look at track work. So we're starting from the ground up, and we're going to look at a number of topics: curve radius, vertical curves, what are those, turnouts, concepts around fixing bad track cleaning, and track shorts. Next slide. So looking at curve radius, you want to make what I call an informed choice. And the layout design special interest group had some really good curve guidelines components, and whether or not the cars can even run on a curve. Considerations like, will the couplers line up? And you can see in this picture here, the curve, 250-foot box cars, the curve is so sharp that even getting the couplers to line up is tricky. It's 15-inch curve and 50-foot box cars, for example. So next slide. So here's basically how the curve radius guidelines work that the LDSIG has. And it's based on equipment length, which means it works across all scales. So it's a ratio of equipment HO measured over the couplers. So it's to the center of the couplers. You'll find that a 40-foot box car typically is 6 inches long in HO. So 2x means a 12-inch radius, right? 6 times 2. So 2x, a 12-inch radius. And, as the cars get longer, this radius gets bigger too, right? Like an 80-foot car will be about 12 inches coupler to coupler. So now a 2x is a 24-inch radius, see? And at this level, equipment may track reliably, especially with truck-mounted couplers. But it's generally considered at 2x, you're pushing it, okay? Now 2.5x, most equipment will track reliably if everything's a similar length. So for 40-foot cars, that's a 15-inch radius. Okay, next slide. So now moving up to 3x, that's considered to be the sweet spot. That's where all equipment should track reliably. Coupler performance will be adequate if the coupler is allowed to swing 50% of the car width. A lot of passenger cars you get from Walthers or so on, they actually mount the coupler box, the draft gear box, on a flexible, so it flexes or slides or moves on the end of the car. You can also get a kit from KD that allows you to create a flexible, movable box, draft gear box. So that's what I'm talking about here, 3x. So I need to fix this number. That should say 18 inches because it's right, 6 inches times 3, so it'd be 18 inches. And then we move to 3.5x. Equipment's going to look less toy-like when viewed from inside the curve. And this is a little trick, is you can actually view from inside the curve, and the curve won't look as sharp as it does when you look from the outside. So that's 21 inches in HO, and you can see a picture here. The cars, you can see, yeah, they don't look, that curve doesn't look too bad from the inside. Okay, continuing on, next slide. So moving to 4-foot cars, that's a 24-inch radius. And you can see from outside the curve, not too bad. And 5x, the most reliable coupling on curves with body-mounted couplers and near-scale draft gear boxes. That's at 5x, the couplers, you don't need to get in there and fiddle with the couplers with a coupler pick or anything. Cars should just couple really sweet. That's 5x. So that's 30 inches for a 40-foot car in HO. Now, you realize if you're talking 80-foot equipment, that's 12 inches coupler over coupler in HO. So 5x times 12, that's a 60-inch curve, okay? So what I like about these standards is you now know what your trade-offs are. If you go to 3X with a 80-foot car, that's 12 inches times 3, that's 36 inches. So you know at 3X, they're going to track fine. They might look a little toy-like, but they'll run fine, and you are going to have to get in and fiddle with the couplers because they generally won't couple smoothly at that radius. So as long as you know that's what you're dealing with and you design for it up front, that's what I like. So these standards work really well for picking your different track radiuses that you want to use, and I find them really, really helpful. Next slide. So let's talk about vertical curves. That's where you have grades, right? So that's where a grade change occurs. And you don't want an abrupt grade change if you want to avoid problems with the couplers, okay? And so you can are out of alignment, almost half the coupler height. And that will lower the glad hand. Or local pilots might hit the railhead, and that can cause a short if it's metal. If you already have a coupler height mismatch, and then you have one of these abrupt vertical curves, now you're really going to have problems. And also diaphragms. You can have real problems with diaphragms if there's abrupt vertical curves. So what you want to do is you want to smooth out that grade change. You want to stretch it out. You don't want abrupt grade change. So next slide. So what's a good displacement then? Because you are going to have some displacement when you have a grade change. So on the far left, upper left is no level track. And then below that, we have a 30 thousandths displacement, not bad. Then we have 60 thousandths displacement, which is an abrupt 1% grade. And then we have 120 thousandths displacement with an abrupt 2% grade. So a 40-foot car, which is 6 inches long, and so it's double for displacement per foot. And so basically what it comes down to, what I decided after looking at these amounts of displacement that you get is I want a 0.5% grade every foot. Okay, 0.5% grade change every foot. So that means if I'm going from level to 2%, then the first foot's a 0.5%, 1%, second foot, third foot's 1.5%. Finally, the fourth feet change per foot. And so you'll get that 30 thousandths displacement look, which is the 0.5% grade. So, or I think it's a 60,000, that's a 6-inch car. So that's 30 thousandths displacement over 6 inches. So it'll be 60 thousandths displacement over a foot. I hope that makes sense. So basically a 0.5% grade displacement per foot. Okay, next slide, please. So let's look at, I use 60,000 styrene to build this. It looks a bit like one of these levels that you get, but I built it out of styrene. And then I glued a 60 thousandths because I decided 60 thousandths across a foot, right? Because it was, I said the 30 thousandths displacement for a 6-inch car, right, was what I wanted. So anyway, 60 thousandths displacement over the length of the foot. So I built it for 2 car lengths long, my longest car length, which in this case is an 80-foot car. So it's like 2 feet long. And then I put 60 thousandths styrene on each end and then 60 thousandths styrene in the middle. So next slide shows you how we use it. Side with it. And then as it starts to drop away from the summit on each side, you don't want any gaps. So that's one side. Or you use the other side then at the bottom of a grade. And you check to make sure that the concave bottom of the grade, there's no gap in the middle. So in the picture that you see on the right there, I'm using the gauge to check the summit that I have on my Coos Bay branch, and the summit's actually right over this bridge. So I used the summit check side, which is the strips with the 60 thousandths on the ends, and made sure that it wasn't hanging in space on either end, and it was touching the summit on the bridge. And yes, that was true. And so I knew I had the proper vertical curve. So you want to watch those vertical curves. Next slide. If there's anything you become expert at when it comes to track work, it's understanding turnouts, because 99% of your derailments will happen at turnouts. And so they're key at turnouts. Next slide. On the NMRA specs, because if you don't check your turnouts, then you're fighting a losing battle, because perfect gauge wheels running over out of spec turnouts, you're going to have issues anyway. So, and believe it or not, commercial turnouts can be off spec with the mass production tolerances. So you see a Walthers DCC friendly code 83, a Pico code 83, and then a Central Valley turnout kit code 83. And you'll notice the Walthers check gauge is too small and gauge hit. And so the Central Valley turnouts are turnouts you build yourself. And really the only turnouts that have the NMRA spec, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Fast Tracks and the Central Valley turnout kits. And it's basically turnouts you build yourself. And then NMRA admits that their specs were confusing. So they've tried to improve the specs to make them read more like a mass production line control manager would think of trying to check the tolerances. So hopefully it's clearer, and hopefully they can give more conformance, the little seal that says conformance. So next slide. Okay. The only ones, as I mentioned, that have the compliance sticker are Fast Tracks and Proto 87 stores as well. And they sell the Central Valley turnout kits. So right now it's only the jig built turnouts are the only commercial way to get a compliant turnout. And the picture below is my Central Valley tie kit, what I call my poor man's turnout jig method. And so basically what I do is I take the plastic ties from a Central Valley turnout kit, and I will replace strategically a few of the plastic, and you get this turnout here, and everything's compliant and spec, and makes for some good looking turnout, looks like, with all the detailed goodies added to the points, and all the ties all painted up and everything. So this is following the Southern Pacific standard, so there's only one head block tie at the points. And so about $8 for the Central Valley ties, and you can get number 5 to number 9 turnouts. And I'm using these turnouts on my new Siskiyou line too. So everything's in spec. Next slide. So when it comes to bad track, I say don't fight it. The rule of thumb with bad track, don't fix it, replace it. I've tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked bad track, and you just continue to have problems with it. And I found, I was thinking I was saving myself some headaches, but I really wasn't. And what I found is if I just cut the bad section out and replaced it, bam, probably one of the worst parts of your layout to next slide. Intuitive stuff here. First of all, bone dry track is bad. And that's because this black gunk that we get on the track, that's been analyzed chemically by a chemist. And I've seen the detailed report. And basically this black gunk is metal oxide from microarcing. So what's happening is there's little micro arcs between the railhead and the wheels, and it's creating metal oxide, which is not conductive. And What you want, it turns out, again, this is all chemical thinking. This is a lot of science went into this, is you want to clean this track with a non-polar solvent. It's because you can clean the track with a polar solvent, which is like isopropyl alcohol, lacquer thinner, acetone. You can clean track with those things, but what ends up happening is because they're polar, it creates a situation where the metal molecules are very quick to pass electrons, which basically boils down to, in plain English, you clean the track with a polar solvent, the track gets dirty quickly again. And this has been verified by groups like the La Mesa Club in San Diego. They started out cleaning their track with isopropyl alcohol. Yes, it gets the track nice and clean, but the problem is it gets dirty quick again. And that's what they were finding. They found it got dirty really quick again, because it encourages microarcing, the polar solvents do. So if you use non-polar solvents like mineral spirits, wall clipper oil, or good electric contact cleaner like Detoxit, I think that T shouldn't be in there. I think it's Deoxit, CRC contact cleaner and protectant, so on. And you can see the list. The list that I have there shows the dielectric constant, and you want a dielectric constant of 3 or less is the good stuff, okay? And then there's semi-polar, which is between 3 and 10. And then anything 10 or more is going to be polar and encourage the microarcing. So there's some surprising things in the polar list. For example, Radio Shack electronics cleaner. Not good stuff to use really to clean electronic stuff with. Bad news. But there's some Glugon, for instance, is a low dielectric constant. But the problem with Glugon is it's based on limonene, which is a citrus-based solvent. And limonene has a very nasty quality, is that when it's exposed to air, it turns into a pitch-like substance. So Glugon, if there's any residue left, it will start gunking up your track. So although Glugon has, but kerosene also is a petrochemical that when it ages in the air, it turns to a pitch-like substance. So just because it's a low dielectric constant does not necessarily mean it's a good idea. So I wouldn't clean my track with kerosene, wouldn't use Glugon. Other ones that are good though, turns out Deluxe Materials, which is a vendor that makes a lot of products for the hobby. Track Magic is 1.9, superb stuff for cleaning your track. WD-40 contact cleaner is really great. CRC contact cleaner protectant. It's interesting that they mentioned the chemist must have talked to the marketing guys, because low dielectric constant solvents inhibit microarcing. See, so it keeps the track clean longer. And also graphite's a really interesting substance, because when you put graphite on really, really thin, it has a very low dielectric constant. So it's very good for inhibiting arcing. And it's interesting, the little side note, back when they were first trying to invent the motor and build a motor, they like the Dickens. And they found out if they used graphite, they would actually not arc nearly as bad. So very thin layers of graphite very definitely inhibit microarcing, but you don't want to put it on thick, because if a thick layer of graphite actually starts to have a much higher dielectric constant, starts to become polar. So that's bad news. Okay, next slide. So you want to avoid polar solvents like isopropyl alcohol, acetone, lacquer thinner, degrades to acetic acid over time. So you not only want to know the dielectric constant, but also know sort of the chemical history, like the CRC contact cleaner and protectant, Track Magic from Deluxe Materials. You want those sort of products. The La Mesa Club, I mentioned them. They went to mineral spirits, and much better, much better. That's also, side note, interesting why, remember the wall clipper oil was a big buzz decades ago in the hobby. That's because it's non-polar. Next slide. So let's talk about the graphite for a minute. What I like to do is I like to clean my track with mineral spirits and remove, basically do one track cleaner car with the mineral spirits and the pads, and then also do a couple more track cleaner cars with dry pads. And so the idea is to clean up as much of the mineral spirits as I can off the track. And then I will give it this treatment of graphite. And so graphite, when it's of extremely thin layer, non-polar, it inhibits arcing. And it actually enhances conductivity because is one of the best conductors in the world. They're looking at making all kinds of computer stuff, electronic stuff using graphene. So it's like the new miracle product. But more is not better with graphite. And what you want to do is you want to use a 2B to 4B stick. Lyra is a common brand that you can get. Get it on Amazon, for instance. Take the 2B to 4B stick and rub it on the inside railhead. And what you want to do is take that stick and rub it like that. You're done. Not back and forth. If you can see the graphite, you put too much on, because it'll start to, you start to get the polar behavior. And also, you don't want so much graphite on the track that you're going to start to inhibit traction. So that's why using the inside railhead, because that's really where the business point is as far as electrically on the rail. And just one swipe, you're done. Not back and forth, not a lot of pressure, just a quick swipe. You won't be able to see it, but it's still there doing the work. Okay, next slide. Let's talk about shorts. 99% of your shorts will be at turnouts. And with DCC, you probably, if you've used DCC at all, been doing it for very long, you'll know that a short on the track shuts the whole dang layout down. So you need some way to manage the shorts. And you need to basically break up the track into smaller sections, at the very least, what's called power blocks, but you can actually create sub blocks within a power district and put some sort of short protection on that as well. And if you want to go real cheap, you can use 1156 auto taillight bulbs, but these days, more and more taillights are turning into LEDs instead of the old incandescent bulbs. LEDs do not have this short protection performance. Better, I think, is to use a frog juicer. You get those from places like Fast Tracks or Tam Valley Depot. You can use dead frogs, just leave the frog dead. But the problem is sound locos don't like that. And then next slide. Well, I thought I had a picture of a yard, but I guess I don't. But basically, the problem is in a yard, you can get dead frogs that are perfectly underneath each end of a tunnel motor, diesel. So you end up with, you still don't get power, even though you think the dead frogs are great. So these days I'm using a frog juicer. It's a superb technology. Basically, it detects that the polarity is wrong on the frog and electronically swaps the polarity in just a few milliseconds. So it's extremely effective. So let's talk about rolling stock and getting things to run right there. So we'll talk about standards, wheels and trucks, couplers, weight, and other considerations. So next slide. So I have a lot of tools that I use for checking that my rolling stock complies to standards. And so here I've got a test track with coupler height check on each end. I use a mirror so I can get down and check things at a low level. I don't have to bend down. I can actually use a mirror to get that low level. Of course, the NMRA gauge. I use a piece of plate glass. I have an angle checking gauge. And then I, of course, for just checking weight, I have a digital postal scale. And let's talk about the different standards that can be established. And so on the left, we do a zoom in of the first 10 items. I check that the car has the proper size, all metal wheel sets per the capacity value on the wheel sets chart below, which is there's a chart down the bottom. It says that the capacity between this and this is 33 inch. It's 36 inch, 38 inch, and passenger cars get 36 inch wheels. Check that the wheel gauge, wheels are engaged, and you want to actually, what I do is I take a Sharpie, put a dot on the back of the wheel, percent rotation each time, right? Check it 4 places. That's because the wheels can be like this. So you might get one side that's in gauge, the other side's out of gauge. And that'll cause mystery derailments where you check the wheels, dang, they're engaged, but that sucker just keeps derailing. Why? Well, it's probably because you may have something like this where the wheels are not perpendicular on the axles. So that's why those slot. So it's the proper width. And we can have a whole nother conversation about whether using semi-scale wheels, code 88 wheels. Again, remember the consistency discussion we had early on. As soon as you introduce multiple widths, you're going to have you create inconsistencies in the widths and you'll create performance issues. Try a check if you keep record of every failure. And what I found after 3 months of running trains on the Siskiyou line, op sessions, almost every single car that had code 88 wheels was pulled off the layout because it had had an issue. Now, because of operations amnesia, I might not notice that, right? It's like, put it back on, forget about it 5 minutes later. Check that the car has solid all plastic trucks and the wheel sets have minimal side-to-side slots. The middle wheel set actually has moderate slop, 30 thousandths, okay? Wheels spin true without wobble in the side frames for at least 10 seconds. Actually have one wheel set that's offset from the other wheel set, which will cause the truck to go down the track sideways. And when you're doing that, the flanges will find every imperfect. They're engaged, but because they're offset at different locations on the axle, the car will keep derailing and you won't know why, because everything looks like it's engaged. Also, one wheel set per truck has a resistor mounted on it that's pre-tested at 10K ohms. I'm doing signaling on my layout using resistance wheel sets. All metal couplers are height correct at both ends and they don't sag. With the maximum up-down play is 15 thousandths. Coupler trip pins clear the gauge and the pin has a slight upward bend to clear obstructions. And there's more, but that every car goes through that. Okay, next. So all metal wheels with the RP25 flange, and not all metal wheel sets are created equal either. So here's Intermountain, Proto 2000, Walthers, Exact Rail, Bowser, JB, and Tangent. Look at the differences between those wheel sets. Prototype wheel set down on below just to compare them. And remember, single source if you want the most consistent performance. And so what I do is I use Intermountain wheel sets. Actually, I think the closest to prototype, and those are the ones that I use. So yeah, pick one vendor, stick with it. Okay, wheels and trucks. Next slide. Look for rollability, HO trucks, whatever. And there's a demo that I show the side to side and the spinning on this video, okay? And so I'll let you know what is okay versus not okay. Next slide. Let's look at couplers. You obviously want the proper height with no sagging, coupler lids and boxes. I attach them with non-magnetic screws. When it comes to couplers, everything's non-magnetic when it's around the couplers. I don't use the magnets, screws to attach the trucks either. I use brass screws. And then you want to follow the instructions. I'll take the coupler box, draft gear box itself, and I'll rub a number 2 pencil back and forth on the inside and scrub it really good until I've got that inside of that box completely covered with that light layer of graphite. Then I also have a squeezy bottle that has a needle tip on the end. I put graphite in that, and I'll put graphite on the coupler jaws inside the coupler box. And then finally, I'll file the coupler face where the 2 couplers come together. I'll file that lightly. And then I'll also hit it with a number 4 or number 6. When you put them together, stuff on forums all the time that cars modern NMRA standard, the NMRA standards are not correct for modern equipment that's too heavy. And so what's the deal with weight? Should you or shouldn't you wait to the NMRA standards and so on? Well, I did some checking. And if you look at the NEM or European standard, it's 2 ounces lighter than the NMRA. And the suggest over for me is, since when is being efficient the most important thing you do in the hobby? I thought the hobby was about having fun, not necessarily, there's a lot of things we don't do that are quite as efficient, or we do that aren't quite as efficient. But anyway, so what about if you've got steamers that don't pull well? Well, it makes good sense to go lighter. And, you can see the international standards, the Europeans and the Australians, they've gone lighter. Okay. Now, the La Mesa Club has an interesting approach. They actually check the car performance according to that checklist like I have that I've developed. And if the car in a minute, the other standards in Australia and Europe, they're 1 to 2 ounces lighter. So what about the overweighting question? So next slide. So again, it's a hobby. So why care about efficiency? And Mike Conflone overweights his trains. I've been to, you're pulling, so the locos feel like they're really working. And there's just something about the dynamics of the trains. You feel like trains actually too. Okay, there's lots of different ways to add weights: pennies, steel, lead sheet, lead weights, low temperature metals, tungsten powder. You can actually get tungsten powder, buy it. They use it to add weight to golf clubs. And I mix 2 parts tungsten powder with 1, and it gives you, next slide. See how far you can tilt the car over and release it. Will it upright itself, or will it overcorrect and fall over on the other side? Or if you pull it over and then let go and it doesn't go anywhere, it just sits there. Okay. You can also use that gauge to check the ends of the cars. And if one end of the car is more than 1.5% off from the other end, the car's warped. Improve your details so they don't break off as easily, like brake wheels. Katie actually makes shorter coupler shank couplers, so you can actually save a couple inches on a train length. So now you can make your passing sidings a little shorter, and if you got enough passing sidings on your layout, you might even actually save, have several feet of main line you get that doesn't have passing sidings. And then there are also considerations around braking cars on a grade. If you build your layout what's called a Nolix, which is like a constant climbing, there are things that you can do for that. So next slide. Making heavy use of the Chester principle in the book on locomotives. And so I'm talking about testing your locomotives, breaking them in, different lubrication. I need to change the date because I'm targeting now spring of 2021. Then there's Chester principle on electrical contact. I use Stay Alive in the locomotives now, and I also make sure I have a good electrical path from the wheels to the decoder, and I will build in redundancy. I will actually add another set of wires from the wheels to the locomotive to make sure, to the decoder, to make sure one way or another it's going to get electricity. Remember, belt and suspenders. And then we'll talk about speed matching in the book, and local lighting, local sound, and have some clever tips for improving traction that doesn't involve adding weight to the locomotive. So we'll also talk about, this is like a preview of the book. Okay, we'll also talk about zero derailments, minimal shorts. Layout B has great scenery. Everything's weathered. The track is highly realistic. But the loco, most people say layout A, but layout B will be the one that's in the books, in the magazines, because it looks so good, but it doesn't run like a darn. Okay, next slide. I think that's it. It's the end. So, questions?
Okay, thanks, Joe. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions over there in the chat, and we'll try to get them all through.
I'm back. Why do you think, or what do you think every modeler needs to pay most attention to have a good operating layout? Track work, rolling stock, spec, or planning?
Well, I think fails. You can't just take it off the layout, right? The beauty of bad rolling stock and bad locomotives if you want to call it that, is that you could take a bad piece of rolling stock or bad locomotive off the layout if it misbehaves, right? So you can, to some degree, tune your performance by what you let on the layout when it comes to rolling stock and locomotives. That affects everything, and it's permanent, right? So track work's very, very important.
Okay, somebody commented they converted to metal wheels with Katy couplers and weightless cars. That helped greatly. Wouldn't coupler displacement be more of a problem using Katy scale HO couplers?
Yes, because first of all, the gathering range of the heads is less. And yes, you will want to be very careful about vertical curves and also making sure coupler height is correct on scale head couplers, because the heads are smaller. So less displacement will cause more break aparts. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Our line, I think the current, but the Shinohara is an older product line. Generally, they're the same, but there might be some differences.
What about lighter fluid?
Since it's a petrol type product, so it'll probably work. But I should look that up and see. My guess is probably somewhere between 2 and 3 on the dielectric constant. So it'll be a little on the higher end of the non-polar group.
Okay, take on Bright Boy for track cleaning.
Only if you're desperate. Now you're given them clean with the Bright Boy, but it'll get dirty faster now because the greater surface area means more opportunity to microarc.
Okay, have you used CRC 226 multi-purpose lubricant? Is it better than graphite? Or is graphite better than it?
CRC 226 multi-purpose is a semi-polar product and not a good choice for cleaning the track. You want CRC contact cleaner and protectorate. It's a different product. It comes in a different colored can.
Okay, we've got time for another couple. Do not frog juicers induce a short by their very nature?
They do. Absolutely they do. But so what? They work. And I'm function, I'm more about function. And okay, you can talk all day theoretically what's going on. Yeah, it's a short. So what?
Okay. Do you have any trouble with wheel slip with your graphite? I suspect
No.
not, because you're not using a lot.
No, I use an extremely small amount, and I only rub it on the inside railhead like that.
Okay, one more. You mentioned code 88 and code 110 wheels. You took all the 88s off. Why was the big difference?
Well, the code 88s I had more issues with derailments at turnouts, dropping into frogs. Turns out a code 88 wheel set will not cross a number 8 turnout frog without a noticeable bump. I just had more issues, more failures. And when I kept track, the code 88 wheel sets came off the layout. So I use 0110, and again, that's the consistency principle, right?
Yep.
The less variation, the more predictability.
All right. That's it. Thanks very much, Joe. I apologize you ran a little bit long, but it's a fascinating presentation. Thank you for taking time out to do that. And if people want to get your books, they can go to your website and use the code SAVEBIG, all in uppercase letters.
Right. Store.mrhmag.com.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back to the Saturday afternoon clinics at Gateway X and NMRA X production. It's July 18th. We have two more clinics before the banquet, which is featuring a nice main course event scale, apparently. Our next presenter is Dan Munson. Dan has been a professional railroader for the past 24 years, working both union and management positions. Prior to this, he spent time as a firefighter and flight attendant. He is an author and photographer that has photos published and stories published in about every model railroad magazine and railroad magazine. Lifelong rail fan and model railroader, married with 3 children, working an operation-based model railroad, which will be his second. And Dan is going to give us the heads up on being a yardmaster. So,
challenge guy, see what we can do to get this thing going. So, let me share my screen. And let's come over here to this and let's play. Okay, there we go. Yardmaster roles and responsibilities. Been involved in railroading and firefighting, flight attendant for a lot of years. So safety is the first thing we talk about since we are not in a room together. We don't really need to be concerned about this stuff. But make sure you're typing in your questions. I'm not shy. I expect you guys not to be as well. And I hope we can learn something and have a little fun with this. So, all right, here we go. Basic understanding of the job of Yardmaster. We're going to talk about that. We're going to have an understanding of the tools that a Yardmaster uses in his position, and there's actually quite a lot of them. We're going to learn how to apply this to your operating model railroad. We're also going to touch on some basic slang terms. So, Bruce already talked a little bit about me, but here's some more information. Hired out in 1997 as a conductor, Yardmaster 2000, Trainmaster 2001. You can see on down the list. I'm currently back working in, I'll start in Murray Yard, North Kansas City, Missouri, former BN Yard. I'll be back there starting Monday morning. So, lifelong railroad buff and model railroader, as well as a railroad photographer. This is a nice surprise operating session that was given to me for my birthday on Paul DeLuca's excellent New York Central Railroad. So, also qualified on the Mini-Mac. Yes, I can drive it. I can even stop it. It's a neat little piece of equipment. It's actually built on top of a Cushman cart. Beautiful craftsmanship on this thing. BNSF uses this around the system to different family days type events. So let's dive right into a view out the window. August 13th, 2016. This is a view out of looking northwest out of the Murray Yard Tower in North Kansas City, Missouri. On. Lots of vans going to and from with crews, lots of locomotives making moves back and forth. So what all happened there? So here it is. It was 6 hours looking out the window, looking northwest. To your right-hand side was the departure yard. Toward the middle was what's left of the old bull tracks. And to the left-hand side is what's called the arrival yard. So you had the power from the unit train, the CAK, KCM rock train sits in the middle pocket. They were the ones that sat there not doing anything. You probably saw the BNSF 17 local, the LNEB 6911. You saw the Lincoln KCK arrive into the departure yard, then made a set out into the bowl yard. He had to make 2 passes or double in twice to get a large block of covered hoppers of clay into the bowl that will be part of the Spring Hill local later. And then he doubles back to his train and departs. You also saw yard job KCM 246, which is a Murray to Argentine transfer job. They departed with 4 big GE locomotives and a bunch of cars that they'd gathered from industry work. Also during that time, you saw a BNSF 2382, which is a former TP&W GP38, still in Santa Fe paint, come out of the ready yard, the north end of the ready yard, and head to the service track. You also saw 2 Jeeps zip in and zip out. That was the RNEB 4561, which is otherwise known as the Kearney Turn. They came back from doing their work, dropped their cars off, and were putting their engines away. Further off into the arrival yard, you had a loaded grain train depart south. to Southern actually the Central Valley of California, Swanson, started to the Powder River, and an empty payloads train arrived, changing crew after a brief service there. So a lot of stuff. So let me just bounce back to that, and let's take another look at that again, just really quickly. Now that you see everything going on down to a kitty litter plant down south. That's a lot of cat poop. There goes the yard job 246 leaving. Again, that SD40 back and forth moving around. There goes the train to the north and the departure yard leaving. There goes the Kearney turn power real quick. There goes the Lincoln train finally leaving. There comes the Palos train in landing. A lot of activity. Okay, so let's talk about that activity. What happened there? Every single one of those moves was coordinated as everything goes on. So Western railroads predominantly use the General Code of Operating Rules, and it's spelled out here, 1.46, duties of the yardmaster. Basically, it says the yardmaster's in charge. He's got to keep track of everything. He manages all the activity in the yard. The other thing I want you to show in here is crossing warnings out of service, track bulletins undelivered, any track switches or infrastructure that's out of service. I'm not going to try to read the whole thing, but take away from that there's a turnover that needs to be made, passing on that information key to what's going on in the yard from that person leaving to the person coming in. For those of you, my friends on the east coast of the country, predominantly use NORAC rules on those railroads, CSX, NS, Amtrak, along those lines. Yardmasters are spelled out here. Basically, the same language as before, responsible for all the yard movement, managing the yard, slightly different language, but same information, same requirements. Okay, can't blow the whistle, you can't pull the throttle, but you can see who catches hell when things go bad. Here's Omaha Gibson Yard. Yardmaster had to deal with this mess one night. Upper left-hand corner happens when a piece of your safety appliances fall off a car. I believe actually the drawbar fell off of a car in the middle of a switching move. The lower right clear, and they kicked those Union Pacific hoppers right into it. So makes for a mess, makes for a change of plans. So we'll talk about having to deal with change of plans later. So different types of yardmasters, multiple different types. Over the years, a lot of these different names have gone away. They're not in use as much as they were before. Some of them are newer and have come along recently. General Yardmaster, a great example of this is Santa Fe used to have general yardmasters like out in Barstow, California. The general yardmaster was in charge of all the yardmasters, so he had the full responsibility, making sure that each one of the other individual yardmaster positions was doing what they needed to be doing. Communication yardmaster, there's lots of these out there working now, in charge of making sure the paperwork's all together for the crews, making sure the crews are assigned a van and are getting in the van and getting going. A lot of times they call the crews as well. Hot seat yardmaster. Here's a position where you are the center point of the yard, and you're the one that are managing the inbound arrivals and departures. You're calling the crews. You may even be managing hostler jobs that are doing power modifications on a variety of trains in your yard. Communication with all of the other departments, mechanical, maintenance away that you have to work with. You talk about a hump yard, you'll have a bowl yardmaster, and that bowl yardmaster manages the bowl jobs, manages the inventory in the bowl, builds outbound trains, and possibly arrives and lands trains that are coming inbound. The hump manages the jobs that are humping the cars and which cut they're going to go after next, manages the inventory coming into and over the hump, and then as it flows out into the bowl tracks for the bowl yardmaster to take care of. The industry yardmaster, this was a common position back in Kansas City, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We had so many customers that we were interacting with. There was an industry as well as communicating with coward yardmaster. This is more of a term that's kind of come out of labor agreements. And this is really just a conductor or a foreman on a switch job, and without a yardmaster at that yard. And he is responsible not only for switching the cars, yardmaster position. Okay, so what does a yardmaster do? There's 4 key things key points that they do throughout the day. They're planning when they first sit down. They're executing that plan. They're following up to make sure that the execution went properly, and they're communicating. And that's all a big circle, because you come back around, you may have to, halfway through your shift, start planning again because of a service interruption, a derailment, an issue with the crew, a locomotive breaking down, whatever the case may be. That's a view at the geographically west end of Omaha Gibson Yard with the daylight job doing some switching. Okay, so let's talk about planning. What trains do I have to build? What trains are arriving? What trains are departing? Do I have tracks for those trains that are arriving? What tracks am I going to build my outbound trains in? What customers do I have to serve today? What cars do I have to get specifically to those customers? How am I going to accomplish this? You know, what locomotives are the crews going to use? Which crews are going to use which locomotives? Which tracks am I going to build my outbound trains in? And of course, it's the all famous time-space continuum. What does that mean? That means you can't have two objects in the same place at the same time, right? So if you've got a full yard, you've got no place to switch, you've got a problem with the time-space continuum. You're trying to land a train in your yard and you don't have a clear track, time-space continuum. What do you use? What does a Yardmaster use? Well, the Yardmaster uses a computer. We still use paper and pencil to this day. We use a ruler, we use our brain, we use the phone, communication, and knowledge of the yard. Keep that center point. Knowledge of your yard. Your knowledge of what cars will fit in what track and how best to manage that operation is key, and what makes a good Yardmaster a great Yardmaster. Yardmaster position there in Murray Yard, and there's a set of Jeeps out front. That's the Kearney Turn Power. She is Kim retired a couple of years ago. One of the best, absolutely one of the best Yardmasters. Fun to work with. She'd make a sailor blush with some of her language sometimes. The crews loved her. So here's a closer view when I was working in that spot, and kind of a breakdown of what you got here. So let's go from left to right. Left, you got a phone. Got to have phone communication. Next to that, we have our fancy high intensity radio communication microphone stand and a toggle switch to talk. And that was the only thing we could talk on, was the yard channel from that radio. It's since been improved. We'll talk about what's gone to later. So top left-hand side is the TMDS screen. TMDS is the BNSF dispatching system. So that's a view of all the routes coming into Murray Yard, so that we could see exactly what's coming in and where it's coming in as the dispatcher lines it in. Right across from that on the top is our Otis screen. Otis is a kind of a poor man's dispatcher screen. It's a web-based tool. It allows us to see where trains are in proximity along the subdivision. It's great to be able to see what's coming at you as well in a different format, slightly different format. TMDS is better, live, current. Otis has got a little bit of a delay just because of the way the technology works. Both very useful tools to use. What tracks they're coming into, whether or not they need to have their power mod, whether they need to get fuel, whether they're setting out cars, whether they're picking up cars, who's the inbound crew, allowing us to dive into and actually switch the cars in the computer. And we can modify that side with notes to keep track of where everything is. Other ends of the yard that we can't necessarily see from the top of the tower. And of course, the most important item, I know everybody picked up on this right away, of course, is the cup of Starbucks coffee right nearby. Got to have a lot of that when I'm working. All right, City Kansas on the old Santa Fe side. Again, you see basically the same kind of a layout, a few slightly different items. See, we got a bigger TV screen to watch the cameras from. That big kind of beige controller in the center of the desk is actually the camera controller. Again, the same two screens on the bottom. We're managing our inventory and our inbound and outbound. You can see the TMDS screen up to the upper left-hand side. The middle screen there is actually just a display of some yard switches that are actually controlled by train masters in the yard. It allows us just to make sure that we're not sending trains down a track that a switch is lined against them. So the thing I want to point out to you now is we've got the different radio information, different radio style, and this is the newer style that we've got across the system now on the right-hand side. It's a you want to be on, and you can see just a little bit of that little gooseneck mic coming up there in the center of the desk. There's a push button on that, and listening to numerous channels. Okay, another view job did all the switching. worked with all the switch crews on making up trains, breaking down trains. Didn't have to have all the information, didn't have to have the additional screens, doesn't have all the fancy radios. This is more of a manual position, a lot more writing, a lot more thinking, where we're going to sort cars to, what track we're going to build trains in, so on and so forth. So I talked about the tools we used. We still use a lot of paper and pencil. There's strides to make it more technology, or to use more technology. But the bottom line is that I'm still making up lists to hand to crews to take out in the field to switch cars. You know, they don't have iPads or iPhones, switchmen don't, in the field yet, and looking off a list to try to know what car we've done here. We've used the rulers to draw lines across, and we're putting blocks of cars in the different tracks. Along the side there, you can see where it says D2 and D1. Well, that's departure 1 and departure 2. So we're building one train in departure 2, and then we're building another train in departure 1. Each car number, I'm by checking each list. So when that train pulls by the tower, I am looking out the window at it, and another example here, you can see a better view of all the tools: highlighter, good old ruler, and a pencil. Sticky notes are handy as well. Good example, this piece of paper here, up in the upper left-hand corner, you see I've got 145 written on that. Well, not first, but second. And it's fairly simple. You can see on the left-hand side of the column, I want all those two cars, the HLTX and the T-Box, to go into track 4. You can also look over a little bit further across the paperwork. You can see they're going to Lenexa and Merriam, and they're supposed to go on that 6911. If you were paying attention earlier, 6911 is the Spring Hill local. Okay, so that's the planning side. Execution. Execution is switching the cars in the computer, spotting the cars to the customer in the computer, pulling the cars. We do a thing called finaling and setting the train, finishing up to, and the train setting process are in order, and then the computer actually looks at it and verifies that there's no long car, short car, no train makeup compliance issues, no hazardous material issues. We can do this as well, old school way, or we can have the computer do it for us. That is the finished product, the paperwork that we print out for the crews, and they take that with them when they take the train over the road. Arriving and departing trains. We still do input those times when they arrive and when they depart. We also have a lot of interaction from all the other different complete air mechanical department, and of course the dispatchers, getting trains on offer. Here is this train, it is ready to go. Are you ready to take it out? Follow up. Okay, so this is double checking your work, as we talked about earlier. It's by checking a train when it leaves. Updating your turnover. I open my turnover first thing in the morning, and I'm constantly adding and changing it throughout the whole day. When it gets to the time where it's my relief's walking in the door, that's what I clean that up, I tidy it up, and I present it to them as my turnover. Say maintenance away is taking a track out of service. As soon as they take out of service, I'm putting it in my turnover, so I know about it. I don't forget about it. And it's in my turnover until it's repaired, or I'm passing that off to my relief. Communication. Changes in the list. Cars not in the right places. We call it strangers. The crew calls and says, hey, I got this list of 14. I'm pulling 14 out, and I've got some missing cars, or I've got some strangers, some extra cars that weren't on my list. It does happen. Maybe you need to have the crews make a different cut, putting stuff in different order. You're directing multiple jobs, so you're coordinating. Job 101, you go out in the lead first. We'll let job 102 come out after you're done. It's managing your yard. And again, you've got managers coming in, changing the plan. You've got mechanical coming along and changing your plan. Maintenance aways coming in and saying, did we tell you we want to work on this track today? We need to replace ties. Now your plans have changed. So a lot of communication, a lot of interaction, and it never stops. Have a backup plan, because inevitably somebody will change this. I had somebody comment a while back about, let the guys just get out there and switch and do their job. That's great. But I got managers that come from behind me and say, you know what, we'd rather do this with this train. Or the engine shoots craps, and now what are you going to do? You've got to get another engine to back it up. Can you limp it up and get it out of the way? Do you have to leave it and go get another one? Have a backup plan, because plans will change, and they will. So when they do, you've got that plan. Upper left-hand corner, that's what we were dealing with one morning at Omaha Gibson Yard. That's about 4 inches of rain during the flooding of 2011. What she did is the levees and everything held, but they closed the gates with the drains going to the river because they were worried that it would back up and come flood us. 4 inches of rain in a couple hours did exactly that. Lower right hand corner, that is Olin Dirk's Barstow Yard. Phenomenal railroad, lots of fun to operate. Takes 2 yard masters to operate that yard. In a prototype operation. There you see Joe Casper, deep in thought, trying to get things worked out. Pat Lanahan back there, Brian Ellis, and a couple other folks. Service plan, TSP is the words we use at the BNSF. A T plan is another example of that. Every car gets a T plan. As soon as it's released from the customer, way built into the computer system, that car now gets a schedule to try to keep. So, touching back on the turnover, what do we need to include in the turnover? Well, if you remember, a lot of that information was already in the rules. Here are some of the things that aren't in the rules that we do all the time. Location of the locomotives and their status. You know, west end of 2-track, east end of 4-track. It's down in the service track. It's rolling over on its side at the rip on fire, whatever the case may be. We want to know where those locomotives are and if they're operating properly. We also keep track of the federal due dates. Every locomotive has to go into a 90-day inspection. So when they get close to that point, legally, we're not allowed to operate those locomotives without that inspection. So we keep track of that and get those locomotives into the shop as needed. Where are the crews? What are they doing? A lot of times you'll have a daylight crew that will be working on overtime, carrying over to the second shift yardmaster. So what are they doing? What's their assignment? Is maintenance away working in your yard? OOS locations out of service. Are there out of service sections that you need to make sure that the buildup of snow drifts on the other end of the yard, whatever the case may be, let them know what that is. Is a crew working for you or not? You know, the reality is that some crews do a great job, get out there and bang out the work, and some are just a little slow. And it may be they're mad about the labor agreement. It may be they are just not as smart as the other crew. I don't mean to make that sound negative, but it could be they're just not as comfortable doing this work in your yard. Maybe they're an extra board crew. That might be the case as well. But that's the kind of stuff that we put on the turnover. So turnovers and ops sessions. Do you guys that have operating sessions, do you leave a turnover on the desk or on the work area for the yardmaster that's coming in and kicking off the operating session? I'd hope that you would be. A lot of people do. The key with that, in my mind, is the KISS method. A lot of people know this. Keep it simple, stupid. You know, some people tend to want to throw in little gotchas into their operating session. I think there's enough gotchas already when somebody walks onto somebody's model railroad for the first time and is trying to operate it and may not know where Poughkeepsie is or where St. Louis is on your railroad. And that may take that's going to take a little bit of time to get them up to speed. The other part is that everybody does things different. We're all human beings, and that is the same in the prototype as it is in the in the model railroad world. So keep it simple. Don't set up your crews for failure. If you set them up for failure, it's gonna be a problem regardless of what scale it is. So give them a good turnover. Give them a chance to get to be successful at operating on your model railroad. And it's the same for the prototype. If I get a bad turnover, I'm going to struggle all day on my real job trying to clean up what the other guy left for me. Okay, names, changes, and titles. Just going to take a few moments to talk about this. We do this a lot as railroaders, and some people have been able to incorporate this on their model railroad. The Murray Bowl Yardmaster manages the former Bowl tracks, but there isn't a hump anymore. So how can there be a bowl? But yet we still call it the Murray Bowl Yardmaster. It's things like that we hang on to. There's still general notices that talk about how to switch Syngenta at Omaha. The company hasn't been called Syngenta. That was like 3 customers ago, but everybody still calls it Syngenta, and nobody knows its real name. So it's fun to kind of imply that and use that, but also remember to keep the KISS method. You know, keep it simple. So A lot of us use, we name industries or control points off after a lot of our friends that have helped us create the railroad that we're operating on. So talked a little bit about this earlier when I hit it again. The human factor equals a prototype equals an op session. Everybody switches differently, whether you're working for the Union Pacific, the CSX, whoever. You work differently based on what you've learned, what you're going on, because you're a human being. We all do things slightly different. How that gets accomplished will be different. I may expect you to switch it this way, and you're going to do something completely different. As owners, be flexible with that, with people coming in. Let them make their own mistakes. Let them try something. They may teach you something that you don't know about how to switch cars. I've watched switch crews switching in yards where I've been working, and I wanted to jump on the radio and go, "What are you doing? What are you thinking?" And I've held myself back, and I've watched what they've done. And there's a couple of times where I got on the radio afterwards, and I went, "Ronnie, that was really cool. I did not see how you were bringing that together until it came together at the end. And holy cow." And while I can't necessarily describe it here for you guys to understand, it was phenomenal what he did to handle cars based on the situation he was in. And it was a work of art. It was just a work of art. So be flexible, let them make their mistakes, let them learn, but also maybe they're going to teach you something new about how to switch. So operating sessions for the Yardmasters and the tools. Do you have a space for them to do the work? Do you have a desktop or a table area? Do you have the tools like we have in the real world, a pencil, paper, an eraser? Clear instructions for that Yardmaster on that job. Back to that turnover, a good turnover for them to start, and clear instructions. Keep it simple, stupid. Avoid scheduling surprises. Again, you're going to get enough of that with the human element. Okay. A computer keyboard desk that used to sit underneath a computer keyboard area that simply slid underneath a desk. So he's got the space, he's got swing, he needs to make room in the aisle. He simply slides it in. Great example. Pretty much the same thing you see here. You've got, there's no place for the coffee. Oh my gosh. Well, still pretty good place to do, but very similar. You're sorting stuff into the boxes. We're doing it on the computer here. Just a thought on what I like to do, and I'm a big fan of colored coded waybills. And this is the Barstow Yardmaster desk on Olin Dirks Railroad. He keeps it very, very simple. So different color for different destinations. So you can really sort by color. It makes it very easy for somebody to come in and manage this huge yard, which can be very intimidating. Everything that stays on his railroad in terms of local industries on the railroad is white. Everything else is a color. So you can simply figure if it's at this industry, it's got a colored card. I'm going to pull it. I'm going to take it to Barstow, and they'll sort it into where it needs to go. Now, I have to talk a little bit about switching by color because I had to do it one time, and I want to share a little story with you. So this is a photo shoot for Warren Buffett in Omaha several years ago. This was for Time Magazine. And if you go back and do a Google search on this, you can find a lot of the images about this. This was a famous photographer, worked for Rolling Stone. And there he is. You see Warren Buffett on the point of that locomotive. You see Stan Lehman is off to the far right-hand side. He was superintendent. And then, Boyd Andrews, the general manager of the Nebraska division, since retired in that photograph as well. We brought this train into the yard, and I was instructed to switch out all of the cars with graffiti, all the cars with old round logos. They had to be the new wedgie local, and it had to be relatively clean with no graffiti. So I told the switch crew to switch these by color, get all the pretty cars out, or pretty cars in, and get all the ugly cars out. So what happened? We switched these out. It took me 2 crews to switch out this 116 car grain train in Omaha. They brought these 2 locomotives over that's been spit shined over in Lincoln, and we got this all set up. And the photographer went to the other end of the track, and we photographed looking back through the cars with the graffiti on it. And I can tell you that the PR person was pulling his hair out when all this was going on. So, funny story. Switch by colors for Warren Buffett. So you can see my photograph there in the upper left-hand side of the photographer's actually setting up the shot. Had some wind come along, and they asked the carman to hold the lighting stuff there right in the track, and they said, "You want me to stand here and hold it?" Well, Warren Buffett's right there. I know. Yeah, talk to him. And he's talking to me. What do I do? Well, you answer him. They got the biggest kick out of having Warren Buffett, right there, and Warren was talking to him. Just he's a regular guy, so it was a lot of fun. As you can see, we've got the smoke and the steam coming from the grain hoppers. As everybody knows, smoke and steam comes from grain hoppers. Not really, but the lower image is the image you'll probably find online. That was one of the images they used in the magazine. Fun time, fun story. All right. Quickly, I'm going to run through a couple of slang terms, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because we're going to show you these in a minute. Shoving high, double, hang or handle, slough track, standing cut, by checking. We've already talked about by checking. Shotgun or gut switch. This is every other car is switching, and that can be really tough to deal with both in the real world and the model. Shoving in the clear, leave it in the clear. Block or build and block or spread. So let's take a look at it here. And I've got just a couple of videos to show you. This is on Mark Steenwick's incredible beer line railroad here in Kansas City. Here's an example of a crew shoving a cut in that middle track there, and they're shoving it high. So they shoved it up all the way to the end of the track, leaving it in the clear, but now they've left room on the other end of that track to add cars to, shoving it high. Doubling over, phrase we use a lot. So we're doubling these two cars out of that track. We're going to double over to the track next to it. Doubling or doubling over. Again, we use this a lot. We refer to this as doubling over tracks to take them or doubling over tracks to build an outbound train. There you go. Doubling over. Making a standing cut. So say we want to leave room on the track on the end. We're going to make a standing cut. Here comes the conductor, Mr. Stick Figure Conductor. He's making a standing cut versus pulling down the lead to make the cut, which will leave us room to put cars into the track later. So we're pulling two cars out, and we're probably going to add two more cars, different cars back in there. That's a standing cut. By checking. Just like I showed you on my paperwork and working at Murray, I was by checking the list as the switch engine crew was pulling it by. We do the same thing in the model. Here's somebody by checking their list, their switch list, working on Mark Steenwick's beer line railroad. So there you are there. There's another example. There's the Lincoln train we saw earlier in the video, and I'm by checking it to make sure that those cars are in the right order. We talked about shoving high. We talked about double. Hanging cars. What does that mean? That means you're going to keep those cars with you while you're switching. Why don't you hang those first three cars while you're switching, and then we'll put them into the track last. Slough or slough off. Every model railroad I've worked on and every railroad I've worked on has it always has more blocks than tracks. So you'll have 5 tracks in your yard. You'll inevitably have 6 to 8 blocks that you have to make. So you're always going to have a track that has 2 blocks mixed in. We call it a slough track. Just slough those cars over to one track. We're going to have to switch them later regardless. Let's just get them out of our way. We talked about standing cut, and we talked about shotgunning. Let's keep moving on here. So fly your colors. This is Kim Kelly and me. Switch crews were out one day wearing their bandanas. We decided that we were going to get our own bandanas, and we stood on the back deck of the tower and waved at them and showed them our Yardmaster sign. So a lot of fun. All right. Questions, you can contact me. That's my personal email address. Be happy to hear from you if you've got any questions. And then, of course, there's nothing prettier than a train leaving the terminal on time, as everybody well knows. West Bottoms of Kansas City, Kansas, one night about 2:30 in the morning. Now it's time to kick your feet up and enjoy a cup of Joe. Bruce?
Okay,
That's it.
thanks, Dan. That was great. If you can kill your kill your screen share, and we've got a bunch of questions.
Okay.
And I haven't even been drinking today, so maybe that's the problem.
That could be the problem.
Question 1, yard limits. How far down the main line do they extend?
That is controlled by the timetable of the railroad and the rules that are in place. There's not a lot of yard limits left today, with a lot of CTC being out there in a lot of locations. But if you look in your timetable, you'll find where it says this is where yard limits start, this is where yard limits end. And basically, the yard limits are set up that allows the switch engine their authority to get out on the main.
Okay. In the yard, you gave the examples of how many switch crews will be working that yard at a given time.
Murray Yard has fluctuated over the years. Typically, nowadays, I believe there's 3 yard jobs per shift, pretty much as an average right now.
Okay.
But at some point, but Bruce, in years past, there were 20. A lot.
Okay, what does the yardmaster do when there's heavy fog and visibility on the TV screen is severely limited?
Well, that's where you really have to keep track of what move until you know the other trains. So everybody
Stops and makes radio contact.
no, and here's how I'll answer this in the prototype, because what train crews really do is they keep rolling. They call you early so they can keep rolling, coming or get the signal to come in and call you and say yard the north receiver for 6013, and that way they just keep rolling. They'll stop obviously if they need to line switches, but most train crews want to know before they come up to a signal and stop, or they come into your yard and stop.
Okay, how does a modern yardmaster order empty cars for customers? Are they limited to only empties currently in the yard, or can they request them from other close by yards?
So modern wise, we actually don't do that. We actually have another department that handles that. But we have the ability, if we've got cars in our yard that are empty that we maybe build for somebody else that we know we can use for the customer, we have the right to use those with the proper communication. So it's kind of a little bit like, remember the old MASH series where Radar O'Reilly would go horse trade to get certain things for the MASH unit? We actually kind of do a little bit of that. Hey, how about I get those cars off the head end of that train and I use them for ADM milling versus they head down the road to Springfield. It happens.
But anyhow, I'm sure you will. This is from another railroad kind of guy.
Okay.
A resultant changes made to the train consist. Are you able to predict the consist setting? Result in changes?
Yes. I realize that's a short answer, but yes. If we train set a train and it's already built, and then we have to make changes, we're going to look at those changes before we train set it again, in most cases, to make sure it's going to work. I do that personally. Am I making it too big? If I put an empty car on the head end of the train and it's over tonnage where I can't have that empty car. So so I'll train set it multiple times if I have to.
Okay, that kind of leads to the next question. Do you check for lightweight / empty cars on the head of a long freight? Somebody pointed out that NS had a couple derailments on Horseshoe Curve because of lightweight cars on the head end.
Yeah, I haven't. I'd like to hear the backstory on that one, to be honest with you. But yeah, no, our system, we've got I think it's a fairly easy system at the BNSF versus the other railroads. And again, maybe it's because I'm just used to it, but you can't have any lightweight cars under 45 tons in the head of a train if you've got more than 5,500 trailing tons. And that's a very simple rule, but it's been there for years. So I'm not going to have a car less than 45 tons on that head end. It won't allow me to train set. It will tell me that there's an issue.
And one final question. What do you think it would be like to work in Bailey Yard?
Bailey Yard. Oh, you mean the Union Pacific?
Yes.
Oh, that would be painful. I bleed orange. I don't bleed yellow. I'll tell you briefly. I was manager of trackage rights, and I was the only BNSF manager in the Union Pacific Harriman Dispatch Center for several years, and we would rib each other all the time. They would walk by my desk and make some kind of derogatory comment about BNSF, and and I'd fire back with them. You guys know why you guys paint the flags waving on the side of the engine? To give the perception that they're moving. I got it. Yeah. So we had a good time with that. No, I think Bailey would be actually, honestly, Bailey would probably be pretty awesome. It looks like a huge operation, probably be a lot of fun.
There you go. All right, that's it. Yardmaster 101, but I think a lot of might have been questions and get you for all to enjoy at some point in the future. So thanks again, Dan, and have a good afternoon.
All right, Bruce, Brad, take care.
We'll get
What
our next
was the-
coin very
what
shortly.
was-
The hottest temperature I seen was 105
Ooh.
Fahrenheit, and the coldest would probably have been here with Mountains Place at the moment. It'd be 50. Over with Speed, it's 92, and if we're over with the boss man, Gordy, it's 55 from what I can find at the moment. What's the weather like there with you, actually?
Here it's about to get up into the high 30s tonight with the Humidex. So it's be pushing high 90s with the Humidex later tonight.
This wheel a spin, and we'll see what comes up, and we'll keep an eye on the chat next time. Up is how many feet of mainline does your current layout have? So everyone jump on board, enter your answer there into the chat, and we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll be back shortly.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is our final clinic for Saturday afternoon of Gateway X and NMRAX production. This clinic will lead us into the virtual banquet coming up at 6 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Daylight Time. So stand by for that. Apparently the main course is N scale, so it sounds like a little snack and appetizer thing to me. Our next clinic is going to be by a guy who's totally new to this thing. It's only his sixth time presenting a clinic for NMRAX, and if you've seen his other ones, such as the Against the Grain Series 1, 2, and 3, and other famous productions, you'll recognize his name and stuff. Dave is currently the gold medal holder for most clinics at NMRAX, number 6. So back from Wisconsin is Dave Berman, and he is going to talk about a take it away.
I have to believe that. Well, a river runs through. What does that mean to a model railroader? A chance to really get a really great tour of Argentine Yard and the new intermodal facility out there. And that's one of the reasons I like being an NMRA member. I've been a member since 1997. And model facility in just south of Kansas City. But it's a whole lot better when you can drive past it and see how they lift trailers and get in places you couldn't possibly go. Well, a long time ago, Gateway 2001, I was going down for the convention, and I got an opportunity to, at that time, join the National Train Show crew. And when you did that back at that time, you had to work a year, basically paying all of your own expenses. And it was a pretty cool gig even then. It was a place on the Chain of Rocks Canal that at that time was the Granite City Port. Today that's gotten to be a much, much bigger event. But one of the cool things we got to see is how they deal with putting all kinds of different cargo before digital, so we didn't have a lot of ways to get a lot of digital. So I scanned a couple of the prints just to put them in here from back in 2001. Well, I live in a little tiny town north of La Crosse, Wisconsin called Trempealeau. I live basically on the BNSF main line. The two pictures you see to the sides are looking out the window of the room that I use as my hobby shop, if you will, that I build in. The downstairs basement windows look just a little bit lower. It's a little harder to see over the laundromat. And as you can see, I don't want for trains, but I also have that really nice Mississippi River. Trempealeau is the home of Lock and Dam number 6. And if I look out my window right now, there is a tow pushing into that lock as we speak. I'm also an avid model railroader. I've been an operator for a long time. One of the reasons that I was interested in moving to La Crosse is there's a great group of guys up here called River Rail. It is the operating group. There are about 14 layouts in what is essentially now about a 100-mile radius. And we literally operate every single Saturday somewhere on somebody's layout. The cool thing about it is you can do anything you want to learn how to do in this group. If you want to learn to dispatch, somebody's going to sit and help you learn to dispatch or to be a yard master. Like I said, I was also on the National Train Show crew. You see a picture of me doing an interview. But you didn't come here to hear from me and how I am. You want to know about a video from Consolidated Grain and Barge to get us started. So product takes a pretty interesting ride. You're probably thinking, well, why river? We can put it on a rail car and we can haul it all the way down there. Well, rivers have played an enormous part of transportation all along. Even back into the Civil War days, river ports were fought over very avidly because they were a way to get products, supplies, materials, troops all the way up and down the center of the country. Now, there are rivers. There's a wonderful, if you go out to Washington and Oregon, the Columbia River is very similar. The St. Lawrence Seaway, various places where rivers play a huge part of getting commodities up and down out of those areas. And because the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, the Ohio River, the Illinois River, all play an important part and sit right astride the grain belt, they play a huge part in getting the product down and out to the people who need it. Grain exports are a huge market for the farmers here in the Midwest, and without it, they would be forced to figure out what they're going to do and probably wouldn't be nearly as profitable. And if you lay the railroads into this, suddenly you see how important that network becomes. The railroads feed the rivers. And you may be, and like I said, you're thinking, well, we'll just keep it on a rail car. Well, if we can do it a little bit more efficiently, if we can save a little bit of energy, if we can get it to places that we couldn't get it without a lot of time frame, we're going to do those kinds of things. Some of the advantage of barges on the river. So we look at one barge, 1,750 tons, one rail car, 110 tons. So obviously, we're going to put a lot more in a barge tow. One particular barge tow will generally have a significant number of rail cars. A 108-car train has about 11,880 tons. One 15-piece barge tow can do 26,250 tons, or basically 2 trains for about the same kind of energy. So we're getting to the point where if we can get it to the rivers, we can do a lot of things with it, and we can get it down those rivers. So obviously, one of the cool things with dealing with all of the intermodal that you saw in the consolidated grain and barge is we're modelers. And we're not only rail nerds, a lot of us are boat nerds. Some of us are truck and vehicle nerds. And that's what we model. We do those kinds of things because they're cool. They add detail, they add life to our railroads. It's what people see out there in the real world. So we want to look at some of those kinds of things a little bit. But grain is obviously the biggest thing that I see moving down at least this far north on the Mississippi. But it's not the only product we're going to have. Coal moves up and down to power plants. Not so very long ago, the BNSF brought a coal train up to Sioux City, Iowa, where the CN, at that time the ICG, the Chicago Central, and the IC before that, grabbed that coal train and hauled it over to East Dubuque, Illinois, where the coal was dumped, put onto barges, and sent up the Mississippi River to Cassville, Wisconsin, and to Genoa, Wisconsin, where the coal was pulled out of the barges and used for generating electrical power. Again, could you have run a train there? Neither of these plants had the room nor the technology to be able to dump coal cars. So the barges were their option, but they had to get the coal out of the Powder River, so they went the way they could, and it worked. One of the things that's big in my territory, isn't quite as big as it has been, is frac sand. And a lot of the railroads here brought frac sand to the Mississippi River where they put it in barges. When they were going to North Dakota, they hauled it by rail car because they had no way to get it there. But if you want to get it to Texas, shove it down the river and take it out into the Gulf and move it over to Port of Galveston. Take it over to some of the other ports that you can get into the areas over there. Or take it to New Orleans and then put it on a rail car again and send it into Texas, or wherever you want to go. If you can get it a little bit closer, the barges do a wonderful job of that. And as you see, that is a 12 barge tow of frac sand. Scrap, see a lot of scrap metal. There are several major foundries. There's a pretty significant electric foundry in the Twin Cities. Granite City Steel gets scrap and melts scrap. again, a lot of scrap moves up and down the rivers. Strangely, scrap is a huge export, and a lot of it ends up on freighters going across the pond to China, to Japan, over to Europe. They have scrap too, but they like our scrap, better quality, I guess. All kinds of liquid commodities. One of the biggest things the refineries up in the Twin Cities produce is asphalt, roofing tar, oils for making asphalt, for paving, all kinds of different products, all kinds of different things that can be hauled along the way. I have seen fertilizer barges. And again, it's a pretty safe way of getting it down the river. There are very, very, very few spills. If you look at the spill count, trucks have a scary record compared to the barges. When we were at Granite City at the port, we discovered that one of the things that Granite City Steel, the foundry over there, produced was coil steel. And a lot of that coil steel went on to coil cars and then was brought into the port, taken off of those coil cars and put onto barges. And you see one of those barges getting loaded is in front of us, and you can kind of see what those coils. You never really think about how many times something may get transloaded, but transloading is a huge part of the equation. They don't like to do it, but sometimes it's more efficient, more economical. But again, they do a ton of this stuff. And we're going to actually look at that port today in just a little bit. Containers. Here again, Granite City has a new name, has new purposes. They now put containers in barges. And they don't put them down into the well barges. They actually have purpose-built container barges with a flat deck. So that's starting out. This is kind of a cruddy picture because it's fairly new that the containers are going up the Mississippi River off of container ships that go to the port of New Orleans. But slowly but surely that's happening. And so we're going to see a little bit more of that again. And then every time I say I've seen it all, they do something different. One of my buddies, Dennis Weber, calls me up and says, they're pushing something up the river you got to see. And of course, I was working at the time and couldn't get off. So he took some pictures for me. These are wind turbine blades. And they're going to, I work for Winona State University, and they're going to the port of Winona, where they're going to be transloaded to either trucks or rail cars, depending on their destination. And they actually built a special piece of the port to unload these things. And you would see 5 or 6 empty grain barges come into the grain port, and then they would have tacked on the front of these things all of these. And I said, hey, I got another load, guys. So another modeling opportunity. So a river towboat. What's a river towboat? It's not at all like the tugboat you think, because it's mainly used for pushing. They don't do a whole lot of pulling of barges. They push things in because they have to get them into the lock and dams. Basically, a lock is the ability to go upriver. The Mississippi River changes elevation significantly as it goes downhill. If we didn't have the locks, we couldn't get the efficiency of the ability to navigate. This is what I call it. This is what I call a Formula One boat. It's pretty transport company beast. How about a station wagon? Marquette Transportation is another company that does a lot of these larger boats. But they're a little bit big to model, and tow lines are a little bit big to model. So we need something a little bit smaller. Well, most of the ports have something that looks a lot like this. And most of the models that I'm going to show you are what are essentially port boats. These are little things that'll push 1 to 4 barges around comfortably. I've seen them push as many as 6 and move them along really, really nicely. That you can put in a port on a model railroad that looks realistic, that isn't going to take up a bunch of space and take away from the track. Again, this is an American River Transport. This is the Artco Maiden, but there are several different companies that have these. Pretty much any place that has any kind of loading port has some sort of boat. Well, we got to model these things. How are we going to do it? Well, Keebri has been building their barges for a long, long, long time. They're a smaller barge than the Mississippi River barges, but you know something? Most people don't know how big those things are or can't come up with the ability to come up with the right distance anyway. So these work really, really well. They have nice covers. So you could put coal, you could put grain, you could put scrap, you could put any kind of thing. So if you're running cars and you need an end destination for them to be unloaded, here's a chance, and you don't want them to go off the railroad to have that happen. Here's a chance to put an industry on your railroad and do something like this. A flat barge. If you know anything about the Mississippi River, there's what they call the 9-foot navigation channel. The Mississippi River isn't called the Big Muddy by chance. It gets a lot of sediment lodged into it, and they are always dredging. And you will see these flat pontoon barges out there in every pool, keeping that 9-foot navigation channel so the barges can go through. Yes, it's nice for the boats and all the people on their pontoons, but that's basically the reason the river gets dredged. It also makes sandbars for people to camp out on and have really, really, really good parties on the weekend. I can tell you how I know that, but you probably don't want to know. So the Corps of Engineers has all kinds of these flat boats. Sometimes they have a backhoe, a pretty good sized backhoe. Sometimes they have a drag line. Sometimes they have a water vacuum and they just stick it down in the sand and vacuum up sand. And then they usually have a couple of empty barges that they can dump. And then they drag it over to an island and unload. You got to have some sort of boat. Well, these are a little bit more tugboat-like, but I have seen these on the river in places. This is one of the Keebri kits. Pretty nice little kit. Does a nice job. It's got the push bars up front. Probably good for about one barge. But Custom Model Railroads did a model railroad for a guy in the Twin Cities that he said, I want to have barges and a tow. And they built a couple of these things. This is another one of the smaller ones. This is a smaller push boat. The Blue Jacket Models, I believe, is the company that makes these. Again, it's a small enough boat that it's very modelable, looks really, really nice, would work just fine. This is the Custom Model Railroads boat. It's a little bit bigger boat. It can be used to mock up a little bit bigger tow, but this kind of towboat is used in many of the harbors that these barges go into. And it's a pretty nice kit. They build and they go together well. I've built one. And I plan on building a couple more because you can't have just one. And then the barges. They make a wonderful barge. You can get them in kits of 1 or 3. They come with the nice top that has the nice little doors that you can open up. So if you want to have a covered load like fertilizer, like grain, like some of the aggregates that you don't want to get wet, that works pretty well. You can have them with scrap loads. They can have cross pieces if you want to have cross bracing. They haul coal nicely. You see some sand in one of them. Lots of different ways of configuring these. They're very, very cool. Custom Model Railroads. And I think it's .com, but I'm not 100% sure. But you're thinking, okay, he's getting into his boat nerd days now. What about the rail? I'm going to show you just a little bit of prototype stuff and give you a chance to take a look at some of the things that are going on. Well, one of the problems with the river is sometimes it does flood, but we still have to get stuff to it. This is Winona, Minnesota in 2001. It wasn't the record. It was not the record crest. The record crest was actually up onto this road and into a lot of the communities. But you see the rail in the background. Any place that you have a barge loading facility, generally you are going to have some sort of rail in the background, some sort of terminal action. Winona's kind of cool because along the riverfront, the rail is all the way across through town. And we have a flour mill there. We have fertilizer companies. We have liquid transfer. We have the two places that you see that are transferring various things. Road salt being one of the things that they sometimes transfer off these because this is Minnesota. We have to have the ability to drive in the wintertime. So you got to salt the roads to keep the ice off of them. Various things like that. But this is what it looks like during normal times. And you can see that there's a push boat in there. That's the Bright Angel. It's another ADM boat, strangely enough, because we're going to show you ADM Benson Quinn grain, which is here in the locale. But if you look in the background, you can see a Senex Harvest States facility. CB Enterprises has a loading facility in this harbor that loads everything and unloads barges because they provide potash and fertilizer. Get it in or out of a barge, CB is going to do it. ADM isn't really that worried about unloading. Cenex Harvest State Ground, they're not for the barge facility. They are where the rail dumps and comes in, and then there are conveyors that go across the road or under the road that go to the barge side, the harbor side. The rail dump is closed, and they are dumping the dump 1 and dump 2, which also have tracks in them. They're dumping beans and corn because that's what they want, that's what they're buying, that's what they're loading. As a matter of fact, they are using the rail dump today to dump trucks because it's harvest season. And anytime there's a harvest season going on, we have trucks in Winona dumping grain. And you can see off to the farther right, that's the rail dump. And it's just a simple shed like you would get with the ADM grain elevator and a little bit of a bin because it's basically elevated into grain that goes back out to cattle feeders. Usually there's a work barge there as well, some way. Either he has a backbone on it, backhoe on it, or a crane, because they lift the covers off occasionally. It's a lot quicker to unload one of these things if you don't have to take it in through one of those nice little doors. So the covers come off of these barges all the time. If you remember back to the because they went down to New Orleans and they basically conveyed all of that stuff out of those barges. And so they don't bother to put it back on. They figure we got people up a river are going to do that. That's why you see a lot of those flat work barges as well. And here's the CHS facility, a little bit bigger, lots of conveyors. If you like gingerbread, this is it. So you see the kind of tannish one, that's ADM Benson Quinn. They are currently loading a barge. You notice that it's sitting a little bit upright in the water. You can't load them evenly. So they sometimes sit up. That's also how they get them unloaded, is they'll unload from the back, and then gradually it will start to sit, and they will move things in. I have seen them literally crane a bobcat in here to help on. Say all that gingerbread. The black thing that you see is one of the coal facilities. It also is known for unloading. It's basically a conveyor out to a structure. Basically, it's kind of a square metal structure with just a chute. And they put that chute inside those little doors. They can move it around just like they would load covered hoppers. And there you go. And this is one that's going to make it onto the railroad. This is Childs Road. Childs Road is a 2-lane road. It runs along the river. It goes back to the water plant and the wastewater treatment plant in the Twin Cities. But along it is a rail line that is serviced by the one. They do other things, but they do a sizable amount of tank loading. And so Childs Road is pretty good. One of the cool industries on there uses tank cars. This one also loads covered hoppers. This is Morton Salt. They unload salt, bag it, and put it in, and salt box cars are some of the rustiest things you will ever see. So if you overweather something, it's in salt. Alter Metals Group. This is from the riverside, but they take scrap out of gonds, unload it, and put it on barges. And they store scrap because they don't want it to decay. They don't want it to deteriorate. They also load pieces of scrap that they've ground onto trucks and rail cars, Twin Cities. Alter is all along the rivers. There's a huge terminal in Davenport, which is where they're based. There's one in Dubuque that I know of. There's probably many others. I believe they're all the way down into St. Louis and further down. But this is my cool building of the week. This is Hawkins Chemical. And a gentleman named Tom Gazier, if you've seen the Split Rock mining company layout clinics that he does, and Dan Dassa, who models Minnesota Commercial, have built this building. It's a lot of unloading racks. It's a lot of doors that tank car part acid. And when Athearn started making the really, really nice acid tank cars with the nice tan bands, I remembered this building and said, that's one I want to play with. And just a couple more. If you want to detail something, if you want to weather something, this is the best way to do it. And these are just tank cars. Phosphoric acid in one of them. I can't see what's in the Eastman chemical car, the ETCX. And just different kinds of things. And a manway that they can just pull this car, second floor balcony that unloads rail cars. Well, they got it. And a chance to do some detailing, do some different kinds of things. Lots of gingerbread on this thing. Aggregates Incorporated does frac sand, does particulate, roofing granules. Sometimes they transload roofing granules to trucks to go to Georgia Pacific and some of the other places in the Midwest that build roofing shingles. But Aggregates does a little bit of everything. And in this case, today, this was frac sand. And they were basically loading cars to either trucks to go north into the Dakotas or into barges to go south. But it has a regular, almost quarry structure in ways of being able to load rail cars, different kinds of things. They get all kinds of material in here. It's kind of just a big gravel pit kind of facility. But I haven't seen a lot of rail car in there, but it's on the way, and I think you could probably justify they did use rail cars for a long time if they're not using them currently. Westway. Westway does a little bit of everything. Westway's probably biggest product that they do in this particular area are products for either fertilizer or cattle feed. But they also have this is Westway 2. Westway 1 does predominantly asphalt and hot tar that's produced by the refinery over in Coates, Minnesota, just south of Cottage Grove. And again, stuff comes over here by rail car, interplay in these kinds of some of those. This is the other side of Westway. It talks about sweet cake. Again, sweet cake is a product that they use to make cattle feed with, and they load that in and out of cars here. So there's just a lot of different kinds of things going on at Childs Road. A beautiful loading structure. And the Walthers structure is a good start on doing things freeze. We insulate a lot of stuff. The one in the back behind this tank car, you'll notice has plates. That's probably a steam heated tank for asphalt so they can keep it moving. Well, we all wanted to be in St. Louis this week. I did too. And one of the places that I was anxiously anticipating was going back to what was at that time the Granite City Port. Well, the America's Central Port, as it is known now, has expanded considerably. The America's Central Port is based on the site of an old Army base. When they decommissioned the Army base, guess what? It became something that industry folks really, really like because it's got warehouses, it has the ability to put things on and off of boats, it had great rail access, it's close to interstates so you can truck. It was pretty much the perfect facility. And this facility is way cool for the model railroader, and we'll show you why. I'm going to show you another video here real quick.
The famous Gateway Arch on the Mississippi River in St. Louis stands guard over one of America's busiest waterways. America's Central Port lies just north of the Gateway to the west, at the heart of America's transportation network. The 1,200 acres are strategically designed to provide complete access to the three major modes of freight transportation: river, rail, and road. Besides complete access to America's second largest inland port and barge waterway, the Mississippi River, America's Central Port also has access to the 6 Class 1 railroads and 4 interstate highways. America's Central Port has been entrusted with the task of expanding economic development in the region. The landscape of the port is constantly changing and improving to service the most demanding needs of our region and its customers. Dozens of manufacturing companies have also made America's Central Port their home. The convenience of producing product, warehousing, and shipping, the diverse list of current companies utilizing space at the port is testimony to the flexibility of the manufacturing space, shipping, and storage facilities available on site. ways. America's Central Port is home to the Granite City and Madison harbors. The Granite City Harbor is a year-round 24-hour slackwater operation, handling 2,500 barges and 3 million tons of grain, steel, petrol products, and other bulk freight every year. Dry and liquid bulk terminals, as well as general cargo and roll-on, roll-off capabilities are all available. The newly opened Madison Harbor, just south of lock number 27. The Madison Harbor, a $50 million investment, also features a newly constructed rail loop for unit train transfers, offering convenient access to and from the port. St. Louis is the third busiest rail center in the nation. This central location offers freight movement throughout the country and makes America's Central Port one of the largest rail hubs in America. On site, the Port Harbor Railroad offers short line 24-hour switching services with on-demand rail service for all port tenants. They're nationwide clients within 2 days by truck. At America's Central Port, access to warehouse, harbor, rail freight handling facilities, and immediate highway access makes for a convenience in shipping matched only by a few other ports around the country. Also included on the mixed-use campus, a YMCA fitness center and recreational trail access, office space, all located within Foreign Trade Zone number 31 and monitored by our professional security staff 24/7. America's Central Port, the best combination of river, rail, and road. Your freight on your schedule. We are ready to serve your needs, as we reliably have since 1959 for thousands of companies who are looking for the best way to get their product.
So I was kind of hoping that we'd get there, but I figured I could at least give you a 4-minute tour. One of the cool things that's going on inside of this particular facility is a really, really cool short line railroad that is very modelable. The Port Harbor Railroad Company uses locomotives we're familiar with and has for many, many years. It was previously to the era that we're in now, where Respondec Railroad, which is a contracting company that basically took over the Illinois terminal lines in a lot of Illinois, runs it now, but the terminal railroad. So if you're thinking, maybe I need to come up with something that I can run some of my diverse motive power and still have a short line operation, this might be the one for you. It looks kind of like this. Gee, sort of like a loop railroad maybe? You start with your 4x8 loop. You've got some industry in there. If you go down to the bottom, you see where those warehouses were that they flew over. Oh yeah, incidentally, Walther's ethanol plant, different kinds of grain dump facilities that you could include, kind of selectively compress in for covered hoppers. The new bulk unloading facility is right in here, I believe. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't seen it yet. But again, something that's very modelable. And they give, when they have the VIPs in town, they give some pretty nice tours. This is the background. You can see the Abengoa bioenergy plant, also known as the Green River Energy Plant. Very similar to what you would find any place that they're producing a lot of ethanol. But they have some really cool motive power. Now, if you go back a ways, you can see some of the older stuff. Initially there were a lot of GP9s, older GP9s that had come off of other railroads. There were a lot of older switchers in here, but they've modernized a little bit. And they've kind of gotten into, when they could get some of the nicer SD40-2s and GP40s, they've done that. And they really like to paint stuff splashy. And it makes for a really, really fun situation. The two switchers on the bottom, the one is a former, obviously, UP MP15 AC, or DC rather, but the other one is a Canadian Pacific engine, one of their GMD switchers. Gee, Rapido just made one of those. It's painted a little bit Union Pacific, but it's kind of twisted up a little bit. There are some pictures online of that engine in the red paint if you're interested in going back a few years. Okay, My name is Dave Berman. Obviously, you've been listening to me for the past 40 some minutes. I put my email on there so you can get it. That's David L. Berman. Don't forget the L. There's a guy that's really irritated with me about getting train email at gmail.com. Facebook, I'm Dave Berman. Pretty simple. And I throw riverrail.com in there because I probably couldn't do this without the help of an awful lot of people that are encouraging me and keeping me going. Our operating group has anywhere between 100 to 125 members at any given moment. We have people in from all over the country once every 2 years. We do invitationals to local groups. If you're interested in operating and you're in the Midwest, close to La Crosse, Wisconsin, I used to commute 3 hours to run with these guys. We run pretty much every Saturday when we're not confined by COVID, as well as other things. They are extremely helpful. They are helping me build a model railroad right now. They're mad at me right now because I've been doing these things a little bit too much, so I got to get back to building bench work because they want to keep going. So they've been really, really good to me. A few other people I need to thank. Tom Gasher. I need to spend a little bit more time with him on the Child's Road barge line or barge job and find out a little bit more about it. Mike Mountainer and Steve Smedley, who produced some really wonderful pictures, and gals, because without those folks, this wasn't going to happen. And it's been a lot of fun. And so it's been kind of fun to be the last one.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave. Fascinating follow-up. So now we've been able to follow grain from the farm all the way on the railroads and all the way down to the mighty Mississippi. So interesting there. A couple questions. One, any idea how much grain is still exported from the U.S.?
Oh, you just gave me an excuse to go look online, and I don't know. I have no idea. There's still a ton. I know the ports on the Pacific coast ship a ton to China, ship a ton to Japan. Soy is huge going to Japan, and the soybean markets in the Midwest ship a lot of it over there. Corn, grain, how much is going into the European areas, particularly what was the former Soviet Union? I'm not sure at this point. There's still an awful lot of it moving. The barge you just blocked through was 100% grain on it, so it's still a pretty significant export. I'd have to do some Googling to find out.
The tow boats and barge combos that go up and down the river, do they go one into the other with the same crew and back, or do they switch crews out part way, or how does that?
Like you're on for a trip, but a lot of companies swap in St. Louis or a little bit in that territory of river because the river gets wider. So what they'll do is they'll take what essentially is a 12 barge tow and they'll add 2 on the outside. They might have a little bit more power, but they have a lot more barges they're pushing around. So I suspect you go upriver and downriver, and then you get 2 weeks off, because I think usually a trip up and down river is about a 2-week. Sometimes it's a little faster depending on the congestion on the river, block speed, those kinds of things.
Any idea how long, if a grain train showed up at a terminal to transload, how long it would take to do that?
Well, just like loading out in the elevators. If they've got a 110 car unit train, they're going to want to unload it as fast as they can. Fortunately, it takes a lot less time to unload than it does to load, because the ports are bigger. They can move the stuff faster, and you're dumping into what essentially is a pit that's going to conveyor it out. Whereas loading, you have to elevate it up, get it above, so you've got the gravity, and bring it down. So my guess is they can do it somewhere between 24 and 48 hours in that time frame. I know that when they send unit trains out into Iowa, it's a 48-hour turnaround to load.
Okay.
To unload, they do it a lot quicker.
Well, that's all the questions we have. Thanks again for another very interesting clinic, and we certainly appreciate taking your time out to do so many for Gateway X. I'm sure everybody's appreciated it.
Well, I've done a ton of research for the new railroad that's going into the basement. This is model railroad number 5. Like I said, I was born into this, so I kind of didn't have much choice in the matter. So, and
Well,
I miss not having a railroad to run, but I have, like I say, I have 14 railroads to choose from any Saturday. So
yeah, well, we certainly appreciate you sharing all your knowledge with us. Just a reminder, coming up next, we have the virtual banquet, which will be Tony Cook and Craig Ross of Blueford Shops, and they're going to tell us all about the business of N-Scale. Following that, there'll be a couple of clinics on operations starting at 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock, and then starting at 9, a couple previews of the next upcoming NMRA conventions. So that's what's coming up next. We will be stopping the July Part 3 once we